Okay, folks, we'll get underway here. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nicholas Hilario, and I'm the Operations Manager at the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. On behalf of our association, as well as our co-hosts for today, the Cool Group and the Trade Commissioner Service, thank you for joining us in our webinar on power to gas. Today, we'll be discussing how low-cost, low-carbon intensity hydrogen can be produced using renewable energy and blended into pipelines to decarbonize the natural gas grid. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions for our panel speakers, please be sure to type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel, and we will bring them up during the Q&A segment at the end of today's program. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Mark Irby, President and CEO of the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, for some opening remarks. Mark?
Thank you, Nicholas, and welcome everybody to the gas advancing integration of renewables. I'd also like to acknowledge our co-hosts, particularly the Cool Management Group, which manages the business interests of the Penticton Indian Band, and the Trade Commissioner Services of Global Affairs Canada. Thank you very much for your assistance in organizing and staging this event. A little bit about who the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association is. We are a non-profit industry association representing Canada's leading hydrogen and fuel cell technology sector. We are the voice of the sector in Canada. And one of our jobs is to do just this, is to organize events that hopefully provide information to potential users of hydrogen and fuel cell technology, and also to provide an opportunity for our members to highlight their capabilities and expertise. Now, in normal times, we'd be doing this with conferences and trade missions, but of course today with the COVID-19 crisis, that's led to lots of webinars, and we think this one is very topical. As we move forward and we start to emerge from the lockdowns, governments are looking for ways to stimulate the economy. Companies are looking for investment opportunities. And in all these cases, we're looking to advance the clean agenda. In addition, there's policies that are coming forward, such as the Clean Fuel Standard here in Canada, which provide the right environment for introducing hydrogen into natural gas grids and in taking advantage of renewable resources to generate that hydrogen. So we hope that we hope this will be a very useful seminar for you. We've put together an excellent group of speakers, and I'm personally looking very much forward to the discussion. I encourage questions, and I hope that this will answer some of your questions and perhaps stimulate you to look a little further into the business opportunity represented by power to gas. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it back over to Nicholas and particularly acknowledge Nicholas and the hard work that he has done in preparing this seminar. Thanks, Nicholas.
Thank you, Mark. And with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's first session on Canadian and U.S. government perspectives on hydrogen. I am pleased to present our first speaker, Dr. Aaron Hoskin, Senior Manager of Intergovernmental Initiatives in Transportation and Alternative Fuels at Natural Resources Canada. This ministry of the Government of Canada oversees the development of Canada's natural resources, including energy, and has been a key player in the development of the Canadian hydrogen and fuel cell industry. Dr. Hoskin.
Thanks, Nicholas, and thanks, Mark, for that introduction. Hopefully you can, I'll share my screen here. Can everybody see that? There we go. So as I sit here on the traditional territories of the Mississauga of New Credit, I think it's a great opportunity to share some knowledge, and I look forward to an open discussion going forward. So seizing hydrogen opportunities in Canada, how do we go about that? Well, oops, hang on. Just a brief overview, hydrogen and the energy transition or transformation, a bit of history, some fundamentals about hydrogen and the current state of play, global context, which I think is super exciting at the time. How do we take advantage of those Canadian opportunities? How do we seize on that opportunity, and then what does success look like? So hydrogen, the energy transition, transformation, for a long time, NRCan, or Natural Resources Canada, and the government of Canada has really been looking at that path to being net zero by 2050. And hydrogen is really a key enabler to that. It enables greater electrification of our economy by enabling long-term energy storage, for instance. But it also goes further. It allows abatement of emissions in hard to abate sectors like heavy industry, like long-haul trucking, where electrification isn't always an option. It's also the lowest carbon fuel available, complements our renewable natural gas and other renewable fuels, and leads into Canada's clean fuel standard. But there's also a market with clean hydrogen that can harness Canada's conventional hydrocarbon strengths. And so I'll talk a bit more about that. But really, the hydrogen and fuel cell story is a Canadian story. Even though globally there's a lot happening, it really started here in Canada, both on the hydrogen side in 1915, an early patent for large-scale hydrogen production. And that was originally for fertilizer use, using Canada's clean electricity grid at the time in Niagara Falls. First, or very large-scale hydrogen production equipment was developed in 1920. And in 1935, original patent for, this should say, direct iron reduction, not oxidation, but an early patent in 1935 for direct reduction of iron using hydrogen. And that becomes important because that's a new market that's just expanding for hydrogen now. And then, of course, fuel cells, and for more than 40 years, Canadian companies have been leading in the fuel cell industry as well. First group of vehicles in Vancouver, first bus fleet deployed in Whistler, and then the first train in Germany, also using Canadian hydrogen technology or Canadian fuel cell technology. So the hydrogen and fuel cell story are really a Canadian story. But there's been false starts. What's different this time? And this is a question we hear as policymakers all the time. Well, really now it's that perfect storm, technologies and strategic partnerships and policies all pulling together. The Canadian government and governments around the world are focused on climate action. They're focused on energy transformation, on energy security, on economic growth. Especially now in the post-COVID recovery lens, economic growth is essential, and there's really opportunities for hydrogen there as well. Technologies have come a long way in the past 40 years. We now see fuel cells and hydrogen being optimized and used in multiple end uses, not just transportation, and certainly not just on-road light-duty passenger vehicles. Flexible end uses, improved durability, reduced costs, but strategic partnerships as well. Conventional oil and gas companies, we'll hear about a lot of that today, utilities, gas and electric utilities, clean tech providers, vehicle manufacturers, they're all pulling together domestically and globally, and that's why we think this is a little bit different. But some early fundamentals, and hopefully this will be a slide that you might see a few times today, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But hydrogen can come from a number of sources. Some have carbon, like natural gas and coal, but some don't. Some are using electricity. And if you think back to first year chemistry or high school chemistry, if you take electricity, you stick it in water, you get hydrogen and you get oxygen. Grow that on a really large scale, and that's one way of making hydrogen. I don't suggest doing it though, because you can get curly hair, but that's okay. But you can also use natural gas or coal, and if you capture the CO2 that's produced in that, then it also becomes an opportunity to make clean hydrogen. Once you make it, you can transform it, you can compress it, you can transport it via natural gas pipelines, and we'll hear a lot more about that in the coming discussions today. You can carry, you can carry it via bulk transport, you can liquefy it, or you can convert it into another chemical carrier for long distances. But once you get it to where you need it, what do you do with it? You can use it in a fuel cell and convert it back to electricity for a number of applications there, from light duty to heavy duty to marine to rail to trucks. You can burn it in a conventional engine system, whether that's a diesel genset or a conventional engine in a truck or a car. Or it's a key feedstock in a number of industrial processes, like oil sands upgrading, for instance, like fertilizer production, like steel manufacturing and heat and cement. Anywhere you need heavy or high temperature heat, hydrogen can play a role as well. There's a lot happening in Canada. I won't go a lot into this slide, but there's policies that are in place, like zero emission vehicle sales targets, the clean fuel standard, carbon pricing. There's investments that are happening, and I show a slide there of, a picture there of an Esso station. That Esso station is actually in Quebec City. There's a couple in Vancouver as well. And real hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are filling up at those stations all the time. In fact, the next picture there is a picture of one of Canada Border Services officers in Quebec City who is driving a fuel cell vehicle, and that also complements our greening government operations activities within the federal government as well. So the government's investing, but industry is really investing, and Canadian industry has continued to invest for a significant amount of time, and that's part of why they're world leading. We have power to gas facilities. We'll hear a lot more about that later on. We have 20 megawatt electrolyzer facility, which is one of the world's largest right now. Thousands of forklifts, long haul trucks are being used in demonstration opportunities in Alberta, and there's hundreds of cars on the road. In fact, in Vancouver, there's a car share program that actually you can take a Hyundai Nexo fuel cell vehicle around and as part of a car share program. But the rest of the world is really investing as well. And these are some recent numbers. I won't touch on all of them, but I think what's really a key one that stands out in my mind is the Netherlands. They just released a report. In fact, I have 85 pages of projects that are on the books in the Netherlands, between 17 and 25 billion euro worth of projects from now to 2025. Their entire energy strategy is being built on hydrogen. Similarly, Japan is as well. But you'll see activity is actually happening around the world. And I know Sunita Sanjapal from the United States Department of Energy is going to follow this, so she can talk a lot more about what's happening in the US. A lot of what's happening around the world is using Canadian technologies. A lot of what we're hearing right now for post-COVID recovery is focusing on those investments that can help grow clean energy, especially hydrogen, while also leading to economic recovery as well. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, is recommending that any new stimulus or post-COVID recovery funding goes to support clean tech jobs, and hydrogen is one of those key pillars. So what's Canada's advantage? Like I said, we have world-leading global IP and global leadership in this sphere. We have the vast majority of global exports of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies uses Canadian IP or Canadian technologies. And that market is meant to grow. It's expected to grow to $2.5 trillion by 2050. These are numbers from the Hydrogen Council. 30 million global jobs by 2050. And Canada can really leverage our existing advantages to really grow that. Production, we have a vast low-emitting electricity grid. We have vast natural gas and expertise in carbon capture and utilization. We're a tier 1 nuclear country as well, and there's clear synergies between nuclear hydrogen or between nuclear processes and hydrogen. We have world-leading companies that build storage facilities, but we can also blend it into our vast natural gas system. You can use it for long-term energy storage. There's opportunities in long-haul trucking, in buses, and marine, and rail, and aviation across the country in the short, medium, and long term. And as I said, our heavy industry, our oil sands, there's real opportunities to reduce emissions there as well. And that power to gas, that converting renewable energy into an energy system that can help decarbonize our natural gas systems is key as well. And we're also attracting direct foreign investment into the country. In fact, just last week, even in the center of the COVID recovery, Volvo and Daimler announced 600 million euro investment into Canada and Germany to grow fuel cell production facilities for medium and heavy duty trucks. So the world knows that we have world leading industry, and they're investing in Canada, and we can continue to grow that. This is just a quick snapshot of our number of our companies. We have more than 100 companies, around 3,000 employees in high-paying jobs around the country. And we know from the strategy work that we've been doing that there's opportunities around the country as well. There's opportunities in mining. There's opportunities to leverage Alberta and Saskatchewan's natural gas to produce low-carbon hydrogen if we do CCUS. There's opportunities to grow renewable markets in British Columbia, in Ontario, in Quebec, in the Maritimes. There's opportunities for Canada in the future to become a world-leading exporter of clean hydrogen. And we know that markets around the world are growing, whether that's into the east or west coast of the US, into Europe, or even into Asia. So how do we seize that? The government of Canada has been working with stakeholders around the country and around the world on a strategy for just over a year now, and we're about to finalize that strategy over the next 6 to 8 weeks. The strategy really will send that strong signal. It focuses actions. It identifies also regional opportunities, regional blueprints. There'll be an implementation committee that follows along the recommendations of the strategy. It will address those key challenges that are kind of impeding deployment right now. It'll talk about how to grow both our domestic opportunities for clean hydrogen production and end use, but also continue to grow that market access, that market strength that Canadian companies have, grow that international direct foreign investment as well as export market potential. And we'll leverage and keep building on those Canadian advantages I spoke about. The strategy itself will have recommendations coordinated through eight themes: de-risking public-private partnerships. And we know for all new clean technologies, there's a need for public-private partnerships to really push forward to de-risk those upfront investments, continue to support innovation, because innovation is key to moving forward on this. And Canada really does have a leverage and an opportunity to grow our innovation. Regulations, codes, and standards. We'll hear a lot more in terms of regulations and things like blending natural gas and hydrogen systems together. And there's some impeding codes right now that we can work on. Awareness, and this is everything from fundamental awareness like we're having today up to and including those end users and how to make people comfortable to use hydrogen. And I always talk about this, anytime you see hydrogen in a Hollywood film, you can be guaranteed that that hydrogen tank will explode. And so how do we get over that concept that hydrogen is a fuel? Yes, but gasoline is also a fuel, and we use gasoline every day. And so how do we get people comfortable using hydrogen? What are the policies and legislations that need to be in place to enable this to happen and enable the market domestically to grow? What are the roles and responsibilities for everybody? The strategy will have that. It will have the key roles. It's not just a shopping list for government. It's really industry, government, Indigenous communities, Indigenous businesses, all working together to grow these opportunities. Regional blueprints, because a strategy is one thing, but there's regional differences in terms of timelines to deployment and opportunities in each jurisdiction. So we're working with subnational governments on regional blueprints, and how do we continue to grow those international markets? What does success look like? This is a bit pie in the sky, but it's really about growing the clean hydrogen production and use in Canada, using it in transportation, in mining, in power, in heat, growing direct foreign investment and export potentials, having hydrogen available for steel and chemicals and synthetic fuels in the future, expanding our oil and gas uptake, making it greener as we go forward, growing those trade and investment opportunities, but also maintaining our research, development, and demonstration leadership. So with that, I will thank you, and I really appreciate this opportunity to share some knowledge, and I hope we can have a robust discussion going forward.
Thank you, Aaron, for that presentation. Again, highlighting the importance for continued collaboration and support between our industry and the Canadian government. It's a pleasure now to introduce our second presenter in this session, Dr. Sunita Satyapu, who is the Director of the Fuel Cell Technologies Office within the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. Dr. Satyapu has 2.5 decades of experience across industry, academia, and government, and is currently responsible for managing $150 million per year in U.S. hydrogen fuel cell R&D.
Great, thank you. So first of all, thank you to the organizers and to Canada, who really, as Aaron said, has been a leader in hydrogen and fuel cells. And we've had a strong collaboration between our two countries for really half a century. So thank you again for the partnership and for organizing this conference. And so I will give an update of the US DOE perspectives. And as a reminder, hydrogen is just one part of our all of the above energy strategy in the US. And it is a carrier. I often think of it as this Swiss Army knife of energy. You can produce it from diverse domestic resources. Today, most of our hydrogen is produced from natural gas. It's an energy carrier, and you can use it for many applications. And today, most of the hydrogen that's produced is used for petroleum refining, for fertilizer production. And in addition, as a reminder, it has the highest energy content of conventional fuels, more than 3 times as high as gasoline or even natural gas. This is why NASA used hydrogen, but that is on a mass basis, a weight basis. By volume, it's actually quite difficult to store. It's a compressed gas. But so that's really a quick 101 tutorial for those who might not be familiar. So where are we today in terms of the US? We actually produce about 10 million metric tons of hydrogen in the US, about 1/7 of the global supply. You can see a lot of regions here, states have hydrogen production capacity, again, mostly from natural gas. We have quite a bit of pipeline, 1,600, mostly in the Gulf Coast, and in fact, the world's largest hydrogen storage cavern in Texas. So again, Caverns, for instance, can store gigawatt hours of energy. So for long duration energy storage, growing interest. There's also quite a few stations, a lot of state activities. And in terms of applications, you can see a snapshot here. This keeps changing, but this is just one snapshot recently looking at stationary power. Forklifts, as Aaron mentioned, we have major companies now, and this also was a good Canada-US collaboration success story. We have 33,000 and major companies. Most people don't realize this, but Amazon, even Walmart, are using hydrogen fuel cell forklifts in their warehouses for zero emissions. Over 25 million hydrogen fuelings. In fact, every few seconds, some customer is refueling with hydrogen. We're seeing increased interest worldwide in terms of buses, heavy duty. We have about 45 commercial retail stations, again, mostly in California, and about 8,500 commercially sold or leased fuel cell cars. More actually than any other country, and that's partly because of the ZEB, the zero emission vehicle mandate. But it's really not just about vehicles. And that's where I think it's important to emphasize the intent of this workshop. And the vision is what we call H2 at scale, also called power to gas, or some countries call it sector coupling. And today we have basically the conventional grid shown in orange here, primary sources, and then the gas grid. And if we produce hydrogen, you can see that opens up a number of possibilities. You can either feed that back to the grid using a fuel cell or turbine. You can inject it into the natural gas pipeline. And what's key is you can open up a number of other opportunities across sectors and across applications. So you can see you couple and decouple from the grid in very unique ways with hydrogen. And the value, again, is not just for one application, but opening up the benefits for multiple applications. Even steel manufacturing, for instance, we're seeing a big contributor for greenhouse gas emissions using hydrogen for steel, fertilizer, and hydrogen plus CO2 for liquid fuels, increased interest in that space as well. So again, that's from a big picture perspective, but what really is different now compared to previously? I've also, as Aaron, we've known each other for a long time, been in this field. I think many of you on this call been in the field for a long time. And I'll just highlight three main areas I think things have changed. The first is if you look at the electricity mix, that landscape is changing. This shows just one example in Texas. You can see this huge increase in renewables in a pretty short time frame. We also see big drops in terms of the price, the cost of solar and wind. Power purchase agreements now at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And there are a lot of different studies and assumptions in terms of hydrogen cost, but we can really be less than $5 per kilogram today. So the second thing, besides the changing grid mix, is the actual demand on the grid is changing. So if you look at one example, this is with battery electric vehicles in California. You can see the blue, basically at night is when you have significant amount of home residential charging of vehicles. The yellow shows workplace charging, and then the green actually shows so-called dragon curve of fast charging, the impact on the grid. So the takeaway really is you can get 500 megawatts of increased demand in just 3 hours. So again, the profile is changing. And one thing that people don't realize is that hydrogen is not just about producing hydrogen from electrolyzers, but electrolyzers can also provide very rapid dynamic response. And so for instance, this shows you a grid request in red, and then the actual of how the electrolyzer can compensate for those power fluctuations on a sub-second scale. So we've actually shown this through our national labs. We have 17 national labs under the Department of Energy and a significant amount of R&D and demonstrations. And for the very first time, we are going to be connecting a fast charger to the electrolyzer system and looking at that grid interaction, how we can compensate. So that's the second area. Change in the grid mix, the type of grid profile, And then finally, the last but not least, which I think is a major change compared to before, is that they're actually commercial products. So costs are coming down, thousands of commercial products across applications, stationary fuel cells, vehicles, stations, and 1 gigawatt. For the first time, we've actually surpassed the 1 gigawatt mark in terms of fuel cell shipped worldwide. So what we are doing at DOE is we're looking at basically what is the resource availability. So the blue shows solar and wind, the green shows nuclear, for instance. What are some opportunities to produce hydrogen and ideally co-locate supply and demand, and looking at different opportunities again for demand. And for the first time, we announced actually we have 4 now H2S demonstration projects. And it's not just California, we have Texas, the Midwest, and Florida. And our slides will be available, but I'll walk through quickly just these quick examples in terms of the purpose of this conference, to showcase Texas looking at solar and wind, again, producing hydrogen, also from renewable natural gas, and then using the hydrogen for multiple applications, including a data center. In Florida, we have solar going to, again, electrolyzer, in addition to vehicles, looking at backup power for buildings. And then finally, for the first time, we actually have 2 nuclear to hydrogen projects where we have an on-site electrolyzer that will produce hydrogen both for the plant's needs and then also looking at additional end uses for that hydrogen. So a number of partners, industry, utilities, we're really excited about these projects. And then finally, we did announce the first ever carbon-free power-to-gas system in the US, and you'll hear shortly later on this afternoon from Kevin Harrison, who will describe this in more detail. And so this essentially uses an electrolyzer, produces hydrogen plus CO2 for the first time with a biological process. A number of partners, the largest gas utility in the US. So very excited about that. Feel free to look at the details and you'll hear from Kevin shortly. And then in addition to producing methane for basically producing methane first and then injecting into the natural gas pipeline, you can also just inject hydrogen. So I'm glad to see on the agenda you'll have more on this topic. And we've recently looked at, for instance, in the US, if we could inject 20% hydrogen blends, that could enable doubling US renewable consumption, because today we produce about 700 terawatt hours. And that's the amount that you would need to get that volume of hydrogen for the US pipeline. So again, showing how indirectly hydrogen blends can enable cross-sector emissions reductions, obviously grid resiliency, as I mentioned, with the electrolyzer, and a huge amount of energy storage. And what we're doing, and we're happy to follow up afterwards, we've launched an HMET consortium and other lab activities that we're starting to look into on how do we enable hydrogen blending with natural gas. And then finally, one area that we always get questions about, so I always like to end with this, and I think Darren also alluded to it, is the importance of safety. So as we see new players coming into the market space, they have questions about siting hydrogen, about risk analysis, and so forth. And so we have a lot of tools available. And in case you're not aware, there's a global Center for Hydrogen Safety that was launched. I know Canada's been a strong partner as well. And it's modeled after the Industrial Process Safety Center, with industry leads, governments, major companies are also supporting this. Go to aiche.org and access to 110 countries, number of members providing resources, tools, training information. So hopefully if anyone's interested, feel free to look this up. We can also connect you with the right lead there. Anyone can join. And in the spirit of the conference and the co-organizers, I'll end with, in addition to our office, which is one of the technology offices at DOE, such as solar, wind, hydrogen fuel cells is one of those, but we also have a DOE office of Indian energy. And one of my colleagues is actually also on the webinar, so we'd be happy to follow up as well. And so there are competitive grants, technical assistance, education, resources that are available. And IE has invested nearly 85 million. So you can see a huge number, 180 tribal energy projects, and we'd be very interested in collaborating and looking at what are some potential opportunities for hydrogen. Again, there are many applications. So we have, in addition to these resources, I'll end with our general website information. We also will release our multi-year plan, our strategic plan. That's one of our main priorities this year. Unfortunately, we had to cancel our annual merit review. I think we've seen many of you here in DC, but please feel free to save the date for next year. And then again, lots of resources, just like this webinar. We in fact have a monthly webinar tomorrow. Feel free to sign up. We also have several hundred that join our H2IQ hour webinars. And tomorrow, in fact, we're going to be showcasing how the hydrogen and fuel cell industry is supporting the COVID-19 pandemic. So good examples there. Again, lots of resources available. And for those who are not aware, in the US, since hydrogen, the atomic weight is 1.008, so 10/8 or October 8th was designated National Hydrogen and Fuel Cells Day. I think the only element with its own atomic weight day, again, just to try to spread the word, get news out. So feel free to mark your calendars there. And with that, thank you again to the organizers for putting on this really important conference.
Thank you very much, Sina, for that overview of the initiatives underway in the U.S. to enable hydrogen at scale. This concludes our first session on government perspectives on hydrogen, and we will now move on to our second session to discuss the importance of hydrogen energy for First Nations. I would like to introduce Mr. Jonathan Baines, CEO of Cool Group, who is the Business Investment and Development Division of the Penticton Indian Band. Co-presenting with Jonathan today is Mr. David Grantham, CEO of Region Global and founder of RedwoodAdaptive, a new energy economy consultancy. Jonathan, David.
Thank you so much. I think this is turning out to be a really exciting webinar and introduction to folk who are not familiar with some of the details. I think the perspective we're bringing from the Penticton Indian Band is really critical as far as First Nations are concerned, and pipelines and hydrogen and all these sorts of things. And I wanted to share that perspective with you. My responsibility, I've got the privilege of serving as CEO for the Penticton Indian Band. We have a bunch of companies. Not all of them are very environmentally friendly. We have aggregate mine. We've got a 1,000-unit luxury residential development, tourism businesses, amongst forestry, amongst a whole lot of other things. Our band, as an example, has been very politically active and would typically join things like the Standing Rock protest and other pipeline protests. And that tends to be the flavor of our band. And that's really important to understand. A lot of the risks associated with some of the energy projects are, energy companies working out how do we work with Indian bands. And unfortunately, a lot of the mentality is one of, we develop a project, we go like sort of 3/4 of the way down the project, and towards the end, we try and engage First Nations in what we're going to be doing on their land. And unfortunately, it doesn't help. It doesn't help move things forward. I think it also doesn't acknowledge the depth of insight and wisdom and expertise that actually exists within the bands. So as an example, we have one of our elders and traditional knowledge keepers. Her name is Dr. Jeanette Armstrong. Her actual PhD was in circular economies. And so to Sunita's point around on that slide of scaling hydrogen, we start seeing some of these principles around a circular economy. And I think it's important that some of those perspectives are acknowledged as we look to develop a new economy. So where we are is we're finding ourselves saying, as a band, we want to protect the planet. It seems like sometimes the First Nations want to protect the planet more than anyone else. I know that's not the case. So the question is, when we look at a hydrogen economy, what role do we want to play in that? And my role as CEO is to make sure that we are at the table, that we play a leading role and do whatever we can to have our voice heard, not after the fact, but rather as leaders in this conversation towards a new energy economy. So in doing that, one of the challenges we face with renewables is often around storing hydrogen and storing energy. Our conversation has evolved to where we are convinced that one of the primary ways to store that energy is through hydrogen. The next question is, well, where do we store that? Do we create another whole infrastructure to store hydrogen and then to feed back into the sort of energy loop and ecosystem, as it were? But as we look at that, I think the most obvious place to store hydrogen is in the existing natural gas infrastructure. That infrastructure exists already. Why spend a lot of money and a lot of impact on the environment by creating a brand new infrastructure when we have one that largely exists already? We understand, it's sensitive in some ways. So we spend a lot of time coming up with solutions that acknowledge that we're in a transition towards a more sustainable energy and economic model, and we want to be participating strongly in that. And so I think the role that we play in the area that we're really interested in, and I think everyone would agree, everyone who's awake anyway knows that the economic system and energy systems have to change. So what we do is we lean towards some principles that drive our interaction with bands. We lean towards a decentralized approach to energy security. Obviously, a lot of First Nations have experienced a lack of energy and therefore not able to create the economies that are needed. So our inclination is very strongly towards microgrids and seeking to add value to First Nations that have existing infrastructure over their lands and over their traditional lands. And so that's something Sunita spoke about, is the co-locating supply and demand. That's a critical piece for us as we look to build out this hydrogen economy. We also lean towards a diversified economy. So we look to work with our tribal neighbors across modern borders, like Citizen Potawatomi, the Choctaws, the Colville Nation. We have things like the Jay Treaty, which is a US treaty formed to acknowledge the freedom of trade amongst nations across the United States and Canadian border. So we want to diversify that and make sure we work as strongly with our neighbors as possible. We are very clear that we're in a transitional period, and we need to be able to participate in this transitional period in order to have a really strong seat at the table in the new economy. We don't think the polarization between large energy companies and environmentalists is healthy or helpful, although we often find ourselves on either of those extremes. And we just find, as I speak to the elders and the traditional knowledge keepers, it just reinforces a paradigm of them and us, which is a very broken paradigm of separation. And our goal as Cool Edge to Go and as Cool Group of companies is to try and bring reconciliation and wholeness to that conversation and to that economy. Our worldview would be that we're all connected to each other and we're connected to the planet we walk on. And any language of separation or any exclusion from any group of people based on their available capital or their industry experience is not helpful. So we go the extra mile to make sure that we work with folk who are experts in their field, and hence we have a ton of partnerships, which David's going to speak to. And I think if First Nations are at the table and are given an opportunity to take a leading role in this economic and energy conversation, I think the deployment of these solutions will be significantly sped up. I think you're not going to have the obstacles that you have. So our mandate is very much to make sure we have a strong seat at the table. We've aligned ourselves with players and companies who we believe are critical, especially through this transition period. And those include Region Global, who I'll hand you over to David, who's the technical lead for us, operating out of Oklahoma and Citizen Potawatomi territory. UBC and UBCO, you've got Joshua Brinkhoff has got a really critical piece around some of the blending of hydrogen to natural gas, which we'll talk about today. FortisBC plays a really critical role for us. And that relationship is evolving really strongly, and we're really optimistic around what we're doing there. CHFCA obviously are pulling all these things together, which is a huge benefit. So Mark and team, thank you so much for that. We also have a strong alliance with ProPipe. And the rationale for that is we're looking to see how do we remediate our existing pipeline infrastructure to make sure that it can take hydrogen. I saw there are some questions around how much hydrogen can the natural pipeline take, but I'll let the experts answer that if it hasn't already been answered. So yeah, with that, I'm going to hand over to David. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Nicholas, Aaron, Sunita, and Jonathan. You could not have set me up better for what I'd like to talk about. So let's get right to it. RedwoodAdaptive is a new energy technology and sustainable growth consultancy. We focused on networked innovation and complex collaborative partnerships, and you can see how those are developing and unfolding and have been for decades on the Canadian side and the US side. So this makes our work easy in a sense. The systems-based outcomes, and this is critical, this complex adaptive capacities and enhanced stakeholder communication and participation. Jonathan touched on this, but our goal is to get First Nations and Native American groups involved at the beginning of this process, at the outset, not after we realize we've got some siting issues or we've got some territorial issues that need to be resolved. And let's work on the environmental piece, by the way. That's going to be built in from the beginning in these regenerative business models that restore the energy and environmental balance. Jonathan mentioned many of our partners in this. I think we've got a great group of partners from the very beginning. That's one of the things that Cool Group did really well, is they aligned themselves with the talent in Canada, which is significant, and it may be world leading, certainly over a decadal view. And we look forward to working with all of them that are listed here on the screen. We like to think of our work as bioeconomics in the hydrogen decade. So that, in short, that means building energy systems that work with the planet's natural cycles rather than against them. We've got a concept for a hydrogen production and maturation cycle that begins with renewable hydrogen and RNG, and then pushes through into innovation, integration, and scale. And then that cycle repeats itself through this hydrogen decade and into the decarbonization pathways through 2050. And we've got an interesting chart here about the end uses for biomethane and hydrogen in buildings, industry, power, and transport. And Aaron touched on a lot of that, and so did Sunita. But our goal is to take the best of what those programs have to offer and then integrate them into our work in innovation and investment ecosystems on the Canada and US, both bringing the core competencies of each country and their talent together in a way. And we create these new niches based on innovation, data, and markets. And our first piece, as Jonathan mentioned, is we've got this renewable hydrogen that we'll be producing. We'd like to inject it into the pipeline, but we'd also like to branch off from that pipeline and build, as part of the development for Cool Group in Penticton, a community that's 100% hydrogen, using the models that are occurring right now in the UK and Australia. And we use those and say we carve out 100 of 1,000 homes, and we run them off of a 100% hydrogen microgrid, using the strategy, the sites, the assets, the data, the expertise, and the collaborative foundations that are already in place with our UK partners and our Australian partners. And we have those as well. We just didn't want to include this in the slide. We wanted to focus on Canada and the US. But as Aaron mentioned, this is very broad-based. This breakthrough in hydrogen is real. This is the first year of the promised hydrogen economy, long promised. And there was some thought and concern. What's going to happen? Because of the coronavirus, is this a setback? Are we all in limbo again? And what we found is not only are we not in limbo, but people are doubling their investments, or they're accelerating their pilot projects and demonstration projects. So that's worked very, very well for us, because we're ready to move on this, and we're ready to move on this now. Our structure, our innovative growth model involves classic models of triple helix, is universities, DOE, and national labs and industry in various stages of technology maturation. So we take a TRL level, decide where it falls, where we need university support, where we need DOE and national lab support, and where we need industry support. And you can see the progression there. As Jonathan mentioned, there are some issues with in dealing with First Nations and Native American groups as equals. And we consider ourselves to be equal partners and very high value partners in this space. And if you go to the quintuple helix model, that includes civil society, which we all would like to be a part of. And if we can do that on the energy side, which is a basic need, I think we've gone a long way to creating some cohesion in this new economy and this new reality that we're dealing with. But critically, those are all a subset of the environment. And I think what we're learning now with the coronavirus and how interconnected the world truly is, we all share the same environment, as Jonathan mentioned. So these native values that have been a part of our cultures for millennia are now becoming mainstream. We can see the Himalayas, we can see the San Gabriels in Los Angeles, we can see wildlife emerging in New York City. This is a critical signal for us to continue to go down this path in the cleanest way possible, not excluding hydrocarbons, in fact, bringing them into this innovation model where they're able to go through their decarbonization strategies based on their own self-organization and self-determined principles that they can support internally, but knowing that there's an imperative for regenerative growth, and business as usual is impossible now. There's no going back. This is an important piece here on the relationships between Indigenous Canada and Native US and how we can build this clean energy consortium. The International Intertribal Trade and Investment Organization is a critical group, Canadian-based, that's brought a lot of this communication together, this collaboration. They've done a lot of relationship building on the US side. Of course, there's the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations. And then there are all of the US players, particularly the Oklahoma players, with the tribes that you see represented there, and the Iron Horse Industrial Park, where ProPipe will be building their new pipe, and they will be building a custom blend for us for hydrogen to, again, take us into these microgrid projects and these 100% hydrogen community-based projects, whether that's in a rural location, remote location for First Nations or Alaskan tribes or tribes in Arizona or Nevada, or it's something entirely different. We want to perfect this expertise in distributed generation and hydrogen microgrids. Now, to give an example of what we think the Oklahoma tribes have to offer, the British Columbia tribes, or I'm sorry, Indigenous nations or First Nations, are a growth pattern that we've established here. Our tribes haven't always had this level of financial success, but we've achieved that largely through gaming and then diversified into multiple sectors in multiple countries to the point where we're able to contribute $12.9 billion in total goods and services to the state of Oklahoma in 2017, which we've got the latest numbers for that year. And we've obviously got operations and businesses in over 30 countries. And this is the key here. This is time to emphasize indigenomics, or indigenous economic growth and development based on our values towards the environment, towards mutual respect and partnership with the global impact. And that's critical for our projects going forward. We've got some interesting interest from the state of Oklahoma, and given our asset base, as everyone knows, or as most people know on this call that are particularly on the US side, we've got a strong asset base for hydrocarbons. We're also extremely well developed with wind, and we're pushing solar up the development chain. So we've got some interesting sites laid under discussion that can bring a large-scale wind project partnered up with the appropriate pipeline infrastructure for injection, and then also moving towards an innovative piece where we take this new Lagerway. It's very interesting. It's a new turbine. It's a 4.8 megawatt turbine, and the electrolyzer is in the stack. So it goes directly from the kinetic energy in the nacelle down to the stack. So you don't run it through the power line. You don't create the renewable energy and then run it into the line and then run it into electrolyzer. You take it straight down to the electrolyzer. So we're going to follow this closely and see how that might work in one of our locations in Oklahoma. The rationale for this is, of course, and I think Aaron had some of these numbers as well, but there's some pretty significant revenue opportunities in this space. And I think we'd like to look at those more closely as we go forward. And I know we're running short on time, so I went through that rather quickly, but let me back up to that just really for just 30 seconds each. But these earnings and cash flow, if you look at those, and the HD+E is the hydrogen deployment plus electrolysis. So electrolysis is key in this. Without the electrolysis, the earnings are about 30 to 40% less, and sometimes 50% in certain markets. So we're focusing on this space and this piece, and these are US numbers. But the hydrogen numbers in Canada, I'm sure, look very similar if you take in the total transition from hydrocarbons to hydrogen-based energy systems. We've also got a significant impact on emissions. Again, the hydrogen deployment, business as usual, then the hydrogen deployment with electrolysis is significant. So that's where we push. That's how we're driving this process forward. Pardon. Driving this process forward in a way where we have the desired environmental and climate impacts every step of the way. So that's a critical piece to us. And thank you all. Lastly, thanks so much. Jonathan and I really appreciate the opportunity given to us by Mark and Nicholas and the CHFCA. We appreciate everyone that's joined in this conversation. It's important, I think, for all of us as we push forward in this hydrogen decade to begin to understand the real opportunity we have here to make a serious change in the way that we approach our affairs and our business. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be involved.
Thank you, Jonathan and David, for that presentation, which highlights the array of opportunities that renewable hydrogen can offer for Indigenous communities, power producers, and utilities. This concludes our second session on hydrogen for First Nations, and now we'll proceed to our third session, which will discuss how hydrogen is produced. Our first presenter is Mr. Michel Archambault, Director of Business Development at Hydrogenics, a leading developer and manufacturer of hydrogen generation and fuel cell products based on water electrolysis and proton exchange membrane technology. Michel?
Good afternoon, everybody hears me well?
Can you hear you well, Michel?
Good afternoon, everybody hears me well? Yeah.
Yes, we do. Michel.
Okay, perfect, thank you. You see the screen as well, full screen? Yeah, okay.
We're seeing your screen with the speaker's notes.
Perfect, let's do this, that should work. Thank you, everyone, thanks for the feedback, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Michel Archambault. I work for Hydrogenics, which is a Cummins Inc. company. I'll start by giving a quick background on Cummins. Most people are familiar with Cummins. We have 100 years of technology leadership, and we've taken the engine technology and transformed diesel into a reliable, everyday power source. And today's Cummins has a broad portfolio of power solutions, including hydrogen production technologies. There's 3 points here that are important. Cummins always strive to define the best power source for the applications. So think about 100 years of diesel and transiting now to other sources of power. And that's why we spend every year hundreds of millions, and last year almost $1 billion in research and development in power technologies of today and tomorrow. And as a result, in 2019, Cummins has acquired the leading company Hydrogenics Corporation, which I was part of and I'm still part of. And Hydrogenics is a fuel cell, PEM fuel cells, and PEM and alkaline electrolyzer company. The products that Hydrogenics made. I'll start with the fuel cells. Our fuel cells were integrated in hundreds of buses and trucks and lots of vehicles over the past 25 years, including one of the key projects we've been working on, the trains, actually the passenger trains in Germany, which are now electric using our fuel cell. So technology from Canada used all over the world. And I'm going to skip to the electrolyzers, which are a way to produce hydrogen using electricity. And we have multiple power to gas projects, including one, the one at the bottom right, where we basically produce hydrogen using a grid control signal and provide regulation services. And then in phase 2, we'll inject the hydrogen produced in the natural gas line. And I will let Sam McDermott continue the discussion on that project, since he will be presenting later on. Hydrogenics is now part of one new segment of Cummins. It's called New Power. So traditionally, we had engine power system components and distribution at Cummins, and New Power incorporates the 4 new acquisitions that Cummins has made over the past 3 years, including 2 battery technology companies, which are listed at the bottom left, Bramo and Johnson Matthey. And 2 other companies, EDI actually is an electrified powertrain company. So they're integrators able to take fuel cells and batteries and put that into powertrain. Because as you know, Cummins does not sell trucks, they sell powertrains. And finally, Hydrogenics, which we have discussed about. And going back to the powertrains, this is what now we look at a overall solution or broad portfolio, including the diesel, natural gas, hybrid electric, battery electric, and fuel cell electric. So it really gives us a really wide area of solutions to propel vehicles. Now, skipping to the point that really is of interest here is the electrolysis portion. We have developed over 20 years of 20 plus years our PEM electrolyzers. In fact, we've been making electrolyzers for 70 plus years. Earlier, Aaron Hoskins mentioned since 1920s and 30s and so on, but he was referring to a company called Stewart Energy, which was in turn acquired by Hydrogenics and now part of Cummins. But Hydrogenics, being a PEM fuel cells technology, used all its expertise and development in the fuel cell work to apply that to developing what is known today as the world's most compact and power dense electrolyzer stack. And you can see that at the bottom right. And this development has been made with a lot of demo projects and a lot of, until it reached commercialization. One of the examples of these projects is something that we're looking at doing in Canada. We're in Quebec, British Columbia, or other provinces which have interest, we're interested in hydrogen. It's basically building a centralized electrolyzer, which you can see here. And then this project has been done in Denmark, but can be easily applied to North America. And then trucking out the hydrogen and supporting fueling stations or industrial or any hydrogen consumer. That plant produces 500 kilograms per day, and it's operated by Air Liquide in a site in Denmark. When we scale up a little bit, this is a 1,000 kilogram per day electrolyzer. Again, I'll leave Sam McDermott later on explain that plant in details, but 2 very compact stacks accepting a power signal. And then that power signal you can see here. This is one of the benefits of our PEM electrolysis technology, is the fact that it's very, very dynamic. It can accept the grid operator's signal and modulate very quickly. So what you see, the blue curve and the green curves are real aligned, meaning that we respond extremely fast to the variations of power. Once we continue to develop our technology and scale up the power density of our stacks and the output and reduce the footprint, we get to very attractive design plans with low total cost of ownership. What you can see here is a 10 tons per day, it can actually go to 10 tons per day hydrogen plant using only 4 electrolyzers. If you can see the mouse moving, these 4 skids are all you need to produce all that fuel or all that industrial hydrogen. The key benefits that we've seen over time, with 70 years plus of experience making electrolyzers using the alkaline technology, when we switch to PEM, well, the efficiency is not plateaued. We can actually be more efficient than alkaline electrolysis. It is a much more compact installation, and compact means, I mean, you have lots of space, and many projects, many wind farms say they have lots of space, but building and using more space costs more money. So a smaller building, a less heavy stacks, heavy equipment is easier to install, very modular as well. Finally, we have 3 other points, 30 bar, meaning we pressurize the hydrogen without any compressors. So very low maintenance. It's a very dynamic response. And finally, no harmful chemicals. Again, we still manufacture these alkaline electrolyzers, but when you go to larger scale, if we can avoid using that potassium hydroxide, then I think this is a benefit. I mean, potassium hydroxide, if it goes into the water and then you need to reject water, there's some areas, some jurisdictions where there's concerns that you can't just not drain the water. And I take it that it's the same thing with First Nations. So this is definitely a benefit of the PEM technology. I take that plant, if we scale it to a real plant, and this is in Quebec. This is a 20 megawatt electrolyzer plant that we're actually working with Air Liquide. It's an industrial production plant, which is aimed at being in operation before the end of the year. This will be producing 8 tons per day using the exact same electrolyzer that I've showed you on the previous slides. We, and I have 2 more slides. I think I'm in my time, but we intend to continue to leverage heavy duty mobility, fuel cell transportation, and create that demand for our electrolyzers. So you can see that there's a very good fit between production and utilization. On that note, I stop and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Michel, for that update from Hydrogenics and Cummins. We will now hear from Air Liquide Canada, who are represented here today by Mr. Jacques Sénécal, Director of Capital Implementation, and Mr. Jean Wattel, Manager of Air Liquide's hydrogen production facility in Bécancour, Quebec. Air Liquide is the leading producer and distributor of industrial gases in Canada and has more than 40 years of expertise in the entire hydrogen chain, from production, storage, and distribution. Jacques and Jean.
See the screen?
Okay, sorry, we were on mute. Do you see the screen?
We do.
We do.
Good day, my name is Jean Wattel. I'm the plant manager here at Bécancour, Air Liquide. Air Liquide is very involved with the hydrogen molecules and production. We are very aware that the hydrogen is energy transition, is a part of the energy transition to reduce mainly the footprint of carbon dioxide over the for the climate. So this is what we see. We already seen on different presentation yet that there is a lot of application and a lot of impact on the emission. We can use it for industry, heating, transportation, and here in Bécancour, our customer are mainly industry, but we have plans to help out the transportation with some projects developing here in Northeast US. There is 7 roles of hydrogen. So renewable power generation, distribution of energy as buffer. This is very important, or a very strong attribute of the hydrogen is to act as a buffer either in liquid or high pressure tanks. Of course, we talked a lot about decarbonized transportation. Industry, this is what our main market here in Bécancour. We can talk about heating and power of houses and stuff like that. And of course, the feedstock for capture carbon. But nothing new yet. We can see that in a 2 degrees world of temperature increase, there is more and more usage of hydrogen during the next few decades. Again, plus or minus 18% more of the demand of energy. So this is what is showing here. This is what we believe will be for the next decade. Hydrogen is a clean, of course, and very safe and versatile energy. We can produce without a carbon footprint. We can transport it over long distance, either by pipeline, as we see in the Gulf Coast, or liquid. Here in Bécancour, we have liquid hydrogen up to Edmonton, Canada. We went to Whistler for the Olympics, 2010 Olympics in Whistler. So the hydrogen was produced in Bécancour. And the mobility, I mean, everybody talked a bit about it. The material handling, the lift trucks is very popular. We have a lot of application here in America and in Europe. Michel showed us trains and trucks and buses. And yes, there is a lot of movement on that side too. Liquide is already involved in many of those mobility fuel stations here and there. California, Japan, Dubai, Korea, Paris, Germany, Denmark, and US, Northeast US too. Like I said, forklift is very popular. There is approximately 20,000 hydrogen-powered forklift trucks deployed in North American market. This is quite important, and we have a couple of customers here in Bécancour that use the hydrogen we produce for that application too.
Okay, I will continue the presentation. My name is Jacques Sénéchal. I'm the project director for Liquide in North America. In 2018, we're short of molecule in Bécancour, and we had already operate electrolyzer starting in 1987. We were producing 3 tons of hydrogen with null alkaline technology. Those electrolyzers was at the end of their life, and we had on the top of that to increase the capacity in Bécancour. We developed, when I developed the project in 2018, we looked different technology, including a steam methane reformer with natural gas, steam methane reformer with biogas, electrolyzer. We had 12 different solutions of electrolyzer. And when we finished the development, we managed to, at the same economics, to have the PEM technology able to run a PEM technology project, and it's what we have presented to our management. It was approved, and we choose Hydrogenics PEM technology to move forward on this project. Physically, as you can see, Michel has a better budget than I. This is the same plan that Michel present. It's the 3D model. It's a project that is in construction. With the COVID, with the confinement, the project was stopped by 8 weeks. However, we restart 2 weeks and a half ago, and the project is moving very quickly. The timeline for this project, we made the decision in Q1 2019. We should start in October. With the plan to start this in October. We have started to receive the equipment already, and we have the ramp up for Q3 2020 and the industrial operation for the Q4 2020, beginning of Q4 2020. It's moving relatively quick. If you look, this project is the largest green hydrogen, decarbonized hydrogen project. It will be in operation. But my vision, the vision that we have in Liquide is probably in the next 2-3 years, it will become more at the small size versus what we can see that it's coming up. But we see a lot of potential, and the project is moving very well, and the next fall will be the demonstration that everything is fine. As Jean was mentioning, the market is local, and it's also North America. We have customer in California, in BC, in Alberta, in Ontario, and all the Northeast corridor also. We will see a very nice future. It's sure with the COVID, the market, we are not too sure how the market is reacting, but so far with the deconfinement that we see, the demand seems to be there. And I would just want to present what our Benoît Potier is Air Liquide CEO for the last 30 years. And said hydrogen is really at the heart of the energy transition, as we can produce heat and power directly from hydrogen in a clean way, with easily understand why it is important for this transition. It's the beginning of the journey. We have created a momentum, and now it's all about scaling up. For Air Liquide, it's not a try anymore. In 1987, when we built the first electrolyzer in North America for Air Liquide in Bécancour, it was more a try, but now we're moving up, and we have several projects in North America, and we see a nice future for hydrogen in worldwide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques and John, for that update from Air Liquide. Now we would like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Christopher Norris, who is the Director of Business Development for the New Energy Business Unit of Siemens Energy Canada. Siemens is a leading producer of green hydrogen from renewable energy using PEM electrolysis. Christopher?
Hello. Just sharing my screen here. Let me know when you can see it okay.
We can see it here, Chris.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks for the introduction. Yes, I'm with Siemens Energy Canada. For those of you who don't know, Siemens Energy has been carved out of Siemens. We're undergoing a process now, carved out in Canada. Obviously, we have a lot of shared services and shared customers. Siemens Energy is now comprised of the transmission group, the oil and gas group, generation group, and the group that I'm in, which is the new energy business. As we transition to a new energy economy with hydrogen, I think a lot of the groups that we see in the energy group, including oil and gas and generation, have a role to play along with our new energy business. You know, as Sonia mentioned earlier, there's different ways for saying the same thing, and we call it in Siemens Energy sector coupling. So we have the production of green power, the production of hydrogen, and then, as I think a few speakers already noted, there's lots of uses for hydrogen within this new and burgeoning economy. I think the head of the Hydrogen Council for Canada, Bob Stasso, put it very well when he said that hydrogen is electrification, especially in the case of hydrogen, green hydrogen, that by producing hydrogen from renewable electricity, what we're really doing is creating a bridge, an electrification bridge between the renewable energy sector and the sectors of the economy that use hydrogen as either a feedstock or directly. Wasn't sure exactly where to begin this, being I think the third in a line of organizations that are talking about production of hydrogen. I think there's just a couple of things I want to point out on this slide from a history, or at least from an engineering point of view. That the energy content of a kilogram of hydrogen amounts to an equivalent of about 39.4 kilowatt hours. This is a useful number that I like to keep in mind. Okay, this doesn't include the efficiency of production of the hydrogen, but essentially what we see is that 1 kilogram represents about 39.4 kilowatt hours of energy, or conversely 1 kilogram per hour of production is produced by 39.4 kilowatts of power, again needing to then factor in the efficiency of the electrolysis system that you are using at the time. Just a word on how PEM electrolysis works. We have a membrane that separates the electrodes and through which hydrogen ions pass in order to combine to produce hydrogen gas. It has a very high power density, and is the other key point that I want to indicate is that it's a very high dynamic operation, which allows it to be very responsive to the type of renewable energy production that we're really focused on in the green economy. Very quick, fast startup and shutdown, very clean operation of the PEM electrolysis system, and very competitive in terms of its capital cost and the overall cost of hydrogen. Although, as we all know, the economics of hydrogen production through electrolysis does face a few hurdles that need to be addressed and are being addressed through things like the Clean Fuel Standard and potential development rates for hydro, as are being discussed by groups like BC Hydro. Now to speak more about Siemens' approach to hydrogen generation specifically. Siemens has been in this business for some time with lab-scale demos and commercial operating devices of a previous form that we called the Siemens 200. We've now entered the age of the Siemens 300 that I'll talk more about in terms of its production and use. Of course, we continue with our research and development and intend to grow our technology rapidly over time. This gives a good indication of the Siemens 300 electrolyzer itself. What you see on the right is an image of a full array. There are 25 modules, and each module is around the size of a refrigerator, a taller and thinner. But that's where the stack of electrolyzers and proton exchange membranes exist. Pressed together, the gases are captured through natural convection above the device. 24 of these modules are in a full array. The array has a system efficiency of 75%. And altogether, there is a power requirement of 17.5 megawatts for the type of array you see in the picture, with an output of 330 kilograms of hydrogen per hour. This is a sort of base unit, a modular unit that can be increased or decreased in size. As mentioned, 75% we can modularize and put these out in a, they can produce hydrogen in a range of 102,000 kilograms per hour. Maintenance friendly in terms of its ability to swap out modules as required after the end of operating life. Digitally enabled through our control systems, high availability, and very fast and flexible operation. Just an image here to show that not only do we support hydrogen production, but with the dynamics of 10% of full power per second in terms of adjustment, we can really be used for grid support and also respond very quickly to renewable generation, type of renewable generation fluctuations that we see both in wind and solar. The modular design makes it expandable. As I mentioned, we have a module, we have an array, we have a customized solution that can all be put into the same building with the appropriate rectifiers and medium voltage equipment, as well as our power supplies and fluids handling, including the gases and the demineralized water as an input. In an array such as the one I described, we have efficiencies that essentially this image is accounting for the amount of losses that occur at each of the different stages of the process. Of course, the electrolyzer itself is only one component of an entire system. We would, of course, when using grid power, have a high voltage transformer, a medium voltage transformer and rectifier to get the DC current that is required input to the electrolyzer. Water treatment in terms of using demineralized water. Cooling, when we refer to 75% efficiency, that implies that there's quite a significant amount of excess heat. I think a later presenter is going to discuss one of the potential uses of that heat so that it doesn't go to waste. Gas purification, compression, and then either storage or delivery or injection into the grid, as was talked about earlier, or any one of a number of extended use cases in terms of methane, methanol, ammonia production, or other downstream use cases. Siemens is able to offer a tremendous number of components on the value chain, not exclusive to the electrolyzer itself. Oops, getting away from me here. But everything from upstream planning and consulting, balance of plant, renewable energy, connection to the grid, compression and downstream fluid handling. We are also in the carbon capture business and work externally with direct air capture providers, and are able to partner for synthesis of some of the downstream products that we've discussed. One other thing, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of our key divisions is the power generation unit. Siemens obviously makes significantly sized gas turbine engines for power production, and many of them are already able to handle significant proportions of hydrogen as an input fuel, some in cases 100%, and our goal is by 2030 that we will be able to handle 100% hydrogen in all of our gas turbines to support the pathway of re-electrification. Renewable energy to hydrogen, and then hydrogen back to electricity. A recent case, the largest case to date, is in support of a steel mill in Austria, a Siemens 300, a half size array. So instead of the 24 units I showed you earlier, it was 12. Is in operation in Austria. And I invite you to take a look at this deck, which is going to be distributed afterwards. There's a few references that can illuminate exactly what's happening in that project. And with that, hydrogen, as has been mentioned, is a key component in the decarbonization of energy, sector coupling, and power to X. And all of this, especially in Canada, must be supported by a regulatory framework. I think Aaron pointed it out earlier that this is well underway in Canada and is necessary now to support this rapidly growing sector of the energy economy. With that, I'd say thank you very much, and I invite you to contact me or post any questions you have on this presentation.
Thank you for that presentation, Chris, and again highlighting the the role of renewable hydrogen as an enabler for sector coupling and the decarbonizing of energy systems. This concludes our session on hydrogen generation, and we'll now begin our fourth session today, which is focused on the blending of hydrogen for pipelines. Our first presenter in this session is Mr. John Quinn, Senior Manager of Renewable Gas Supply at FortisBC, a major electricity and natural gas distribution utility in the province of British Columbia, Canada. John?
So good morning, everyone. As per Nicholas' introduction, my name is John Quinn, Senior Manager for Renewable Gas Supply at FortisBC. I think I know some of the folks that have presented already, so a pleasure to meet you again. And for everyone I don't know, it's a pleasure to meet you today. My presentation today, it's not entirely technically focused. I can't speak to technical issues, and there will be follow-up presentations, from example, UBC, that will do a much deeper dive into the technical aspects of hydrogen, particularly blending and natural gas infrastructure. Just to kick off today, to introduce Fortis to people on the webinar that are familiar with Fortis. Fortis Inc. is across North America. The Fortis Inc. operations are shown on a slide on this presentation. FortisBC Energy Inc., based in British Columbia and Canada, for whom I work for, is just shown in the top right-hand corner. FortisBC Energy. This screen shows the service territories in British Columbia. The blue area speaks to the natural gas service territory, and the smaller green shaded area in the bottom of the presentation shows combined gas and power service territories. In total, about 1.2 million customers, I do believe. Just stepping into the body of my presentation today, this slide speaks to FortisBC's clean growth pathway at 2050. It's a diversified approach that supports BC's energy needs, and 30 by 30 is a recent corporate commitment by Fortis. It represents an interim target to accelerate GHG emissions across our customer base in British Columbia and lead the way to lower carbon on the part of our customers. There are four key pillars to FortisBC's clean growth pathway and 30 by 30 initiative, and renewable gas is one of the key pillars that will contribute significantly to achieving this target. And that's what I'm going to present further today. In terms of FortisBC and renewable gas supply, in particular, the potential feedstock resources in BC to supply Fortis renewable gas needs into the future. This screen speaks to a number of different aspects of this dynamic or emerging situation. So the three horizontal lines on this graph speak to the key targets, let's say. The red line along the bottom, that reflects FortisBC's current renewable gas supply portfolio, and it comprises on-stream renewable gas supply that FortisBC is currently delivering to our customers. It includes projects with our utility commission here in British Columbia, and also additional potential supplies in various preliminary stages of negotiations. So in total, that portfolio represents, on an annual energy basis, about 15 petajoules, or potentially up to 15 petajoules. In terms of the 30 by 30 target, that is represented by the blue horizontal line, and on an annual energy basis, that is approximately 30 petajoules per year, and you will read or learn the background of that number and the drivers behind it. It's laid out in the British Columbia, the Clean BC plan. So from those two lines, right now Fortis is in a strong position as we move forward to meet our 30 by 30 target. In terms of longer term targets at 2050, that's represented by the yellow or orange line. That's a much larger number in terms of annual energy volume that Fortis will deliver to our customers in terms of a low carbon or renewable gas diversified portfolio. Considering those targets, the various stacks or columns along the horizontal axis represents the potential supply of renewable gas based on the feedstocks currently available in British Columbia. So this is in BC. And the data that represents these stacks is taken from two main sources of literature. One is the Halbar report and the other is the BC Hydrogen study. So just breaking this two key pathways in terms of renewable gas. There's renewable natural gas or biomethane from a range of resources, and hydrogen. So the total renewable natural gas is characterized by the solid green stack, and it's clear to see that that is going to be one of the key enablers to allow Fortis to achieve our renewable or GHG reduction targets. But in considering out to 2050, the orange line, it's key that there will be additional supplies of renewable gas needed to meet the longer term targets. And this is where hydrogen comes into play. Currently, hydrogen is showing significant potential in facilitating these longer term targets. I think this is replicated around the world by countries who are looking forward to 2050 and conceptualizing the renewable gas or low carbon resource stack that will help meet those targets. Focusing a little bit on hydrogen. So FortisBC's hydrogen vision, it's laid out here in 3 phases. Just focusing on phase 1, that I think is going to be one of the key phases in terms of long-term success. And Fortis is active in progressing phase 1 right now. And I think we're going to speak a lot more to the detail on this as the next presenters speak to example for hydrogen injection and blending. But a couple of key activities as we progress, or Fortis progresses through this phase in the near term, will include things like hydrogen readiness studies, looking at our infrastructure, research and development to investigate and determine and fill various different types of knowledge gaps, the development of a fleet of potentially codes and standards to speak to those knowledge gaps and drive the hydrogen industry forward. In addition, engagement, communicate, and education, both internally in Fortis and externally with our stakeholders and customers, is going to be a large part of this. At the bottom of the slide deck, I've included 4 of a longer list of strategic efforts within this hydrogen vision that Fortis considers very, very important to success. Identification and communication of hydrogen as a priority sector. I think it's a key theme we're hearing today. It's very important to communicate hydrogen and its benefits, both in near term and longer term as we strive to decarbonize our regional infrastructure. We need to establish, at least in Fortis's perspective, or for the opinion of FortisBC, a strong hydrogen working group here in BC. It, for example, could fall under the framework of the Canadian Hydrogen Advisory Council, which is detailed and pulled together in various NRCan recent document issues. Research, development, and deployment to expand local hydrogen cluster knowledge base and develop expertise. It's going to be key as we start to develop hydrogen in sectors of to decarbonize sectors of the economy where it's currently not utilized, for example, decarbonizing natural gas. And then key to this will be development of sector-specific approaches, or as I like to call it, boots-on-the-ground projects that really demonstrate the potential of hydrogen in some critical applications. And this all sits on the back of our regional infrastructure, which is just presented here on the right-hand side of the slide. Various different service territories, both in BC and south of the border in the US, are shown in various shades of color. The key takeaway, at least from this image from me, is the interconnected web, the regional infrastructure, and the significant reach of that natural gas infrastructure, and how it will be a key player in enabling hydrogen as we move forward. Doing a little bit of a deeper dive on enabling hydrogen. So achieving the vision that I just spoke to. There's 4 key enabling pillars that I've presented here at a high level. Safety is I'd say a very Pertinent theme right now, and I think we'll probably hear a lot more around safety in the next presenters as they speak to, for example, hydrogen injection and blending. Fortis, we pride ourselves on the safe, reliable delivery of natural gas energy, and as we consider hydrogen and move forward, that same level of service and reliability will need to be maintained. Safety is a broad-based term that really speaks to that reliable delivery of energy to our customers. We'll simply need to manage that in every aspect of our development, our stepwise development plan when it comes to enabling hydrogen. Infrastructure, I just highlighted on the previous slide. Fortis, we'll strive to leverage the reach of the existing gas infrastructure, and we'll use our systems to the extent possible to enable hydrogen. There's a number of different ways that are methods that Fortis is considering right now. Injection and blending is probably the near-term mover. Notwithstanding, there is certain development activities required to understand how that can be achieved safely. Injecting and blending will be a big part of enabling hydrogen as we move forward. Utilizing existing infrastructure through upgrades or repurposing for 100% hydrogen delivery is another concept that Fortis is considering. And then the ultimate, probably longer term goal as hydrogen supply and hydrogen markets start to develop on a local and regional basis, that may justify the build of new dedicated infrastructure. You could refer to it as backbone infrastructure as large-scale commercialization and rapid growth occurs into the future, probably in the longer term beyond 2030. Use cases are the boots on the ground I just mentioned. Again, it's going to be a key enabler of hydrogen, especially in sectors of the economy where hydrogen just is not part of the fuel mix. Again, I'll refer to the utility environment here in Fortis, where we deliver natural gas to over 1 million of our customers. To introduce hydrogen to that cohort of our customers will require a stepwise, careful approach, but using strategic demonstration projects such as initial deployment of hydrogen blending in the natural gas grids, such as Enbridge gas distribution we'll likely speak to later. Those are going to be key enablers as we move forward with hydrogen. The ultimate upshot of use cases and real projects, it will promote demand and investment to build out sustainable supply chains. And supporting all of this will require long-term policy commitments on part of government and government agencies. I've included carbon abatement at the bottom of this slide. This links back to the resource stack presented in my earlier slide, where there are two hydrogen supply pathways, green or renewable hydrogen produced from renewable electricity, and hydrogen produced from abundant natural gas resources in BC. So carbon abatement will be a key technology or tool in enabling that, and it will facilitate the scale of blue hydrogen, which would rely on carbon capture and storage. Just to speak a little bit to the technical side of particularly the first three enabling pillars, the small schematic or decision tree on the right-hand side. I've taken this from the HyReady joint industry initiative that's underway with international partners to establish technical guidelines to enable hydrogen injection and blending in a natural gas grid. And this speaks to some of the key decision points that we in Fortis are working through right now as we cycle through the development phase of understanding how we can build a portfolio of hydrogen in our natural gas supply chain. To finish off, FortisBC, we're engaging really on the development of a hydrogen business right now. It's going to sit beside our incumbent renewable natural gas business that FortisBC has developed, established, developed and grown over the past decade. And it's proven to be extremely innovative. I think one of the first movers in North America, and the envy of many other utilities who want to be able to offer customers the same alternative, the same options to decarbonize their energy use. So our hydrogen business plan is going to sit and dovetail with renewable gas. And right now there are a few key priorities that Fortis is focusing on. In terms of policy, relates back to the British Columbia Clean BC plan. Right now, the target in that plan is 15% renewable gas content by 2030. So as we move forward in BC, I think we will gain further understanding as to what that means. It's going to have to link back to effectively carbon intensity related to different low carbon fuel supplies, and how not just by delivering energy, but delivering energy with an established carbon intensity, we will achieve our key goal, which is GHG reduction targets over time. In terms of legislation, the FortisBC renewable gas business is enabled under the BC greenhouse gas reduction regulation to establish, on the part of Fortis, to establish hydrogen as a low carbon fuel to supply to our customers in the same way as renewable natural gas currently is. The GGRR will have to be amended to accommodate that and speak to things like allowable volumes, pricing structures, etc. Power to gas, or producing hydrogen from electrolysis, again a central theme today. It's going to be one of the key hydrogen supply pathways as we move forward. Electricity is the largest part of the operating cost of that particular supply chain. So acquiring the lowest cost power possible will result in the least cost hydrogen fuel, and obviously provide the best value to our customers if and when Fortis supplies hydrogen as a low carbon fuel along that pathway. Regulations, final priority, fairly broad-based term. One of the key activities under this, under regulations, will be establishing how, at least this is how I think about it, how we Fortis can effectively institutionalize hydrogen in our business. So right now, everything we do in terms of supplying natural gas and renewable natural gas to our customers, it's operated within our business seamlessly. It's got strict governance structures, technical codes and standards that allow us to build new infrastructure, deliver that to our customers, and indeed our customers can acquire appliances that run on natural gas. So that type of institutionalized way to deliver energy will have to be built to integrate hydrogen into our business, into our renewable gas supply portfolio. I think some of the details that we will move on to now will speak to the work underway to inform codes and regulations, procedures, processes, engagement with our technical regulators to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Sean. We'll now hear from ProPipe USA, who are represented here today by Mr. Sean Ho, Vice President of North American Operations, and Mr. Patrick Lamaro, Director of Global Business Relations. ProPipe is a leading company in pipeline infrastructure inspection, rehabilitation, and cross-border prevention. Sean and Patrick.
Well, thank you very much. Here, I'm just going to share the screen. Second here, folks. All right. So can everyone see my screen?
We can see you here, Patrick.
Here we go. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, your screen.
All right, very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you so much for allowing ProPipe USA LLC the opportunity to present here today. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Mark and Nicholas and the CHFCA for having us and participating in this great platform of communication. On behalf of our ownership team, we certainly would like to thank you again for allowing us to share this great initiative in terms of what we have done as a good Canadian group who's positioned themselves in the state of Oklahoma. Joining with me, one of the ownership members as with myself is Sean Hove, who is listening in on the call. Before we get into my presentation, I'd like to first and foremost acknowledge some key groups and folks that have been instrumental in the development of our operations and business in the state of Oklahoma. The Canadian Global Affairs and Trade Commission Office out of Houston and Dallas, and the United States Department of Commerce and International Trade, who we work with closely every day, were quite instrumental in bringing our business and our opportunity as a good Canadian entity and interest into the United States. Second to that, we'd also like to acknowledge the citizens of the Potawatomi Nation, where our facility is being built as we speak. We'd like to certainly acknowledge Mr. Chairman, Mr. Dr. Jim Collard, Mr. Bob Carruthers, and Val Duvall, who were instrumental in working with us to be working with a good Canadian group who has a large-scale model that is going to be able to produce some amazing products as a Canadian group. We're very, very proud to be positioned in the Iron Horse development in central Oklahoma, in Shawnee, Oklahoma. We've been received remarkably well, and we're delighted to be able to have that as a stepping stone to grow a very large and successful business in producing pipe, which we're going to hear a little more. In addition to that, we'd like to also acknowledge today the strategic alignment that we have now created with the Accrual Management Group and, of course, the Penticton First Nation group. We're incredibly excited about that opportunity, which I'm going to share with you in a few minutes, of why we have positioned ourselves with two amazing groups in the United States, but also locally here in the Canadian, in particular in the BC market. So today what I hope to do, I plan to share with you in as possibly as short order as possible due to time restrictions, just a short summary of what we intend to provide and are going to be doing in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Once again, you'll see the picture. Again, the information is, I've tried to capture it as short as we can. I certainly would welcome any conversations or individual questions that you may have, either through this communication or separate of that, of your ongoing interests. Essentially what we have done is we have positioned ourselves with our ownership group to position ProPipe to be able to produce HDP pipe. Why would we do that, and what is the market capacity? Well, we believe in our research, which took us about 1.5 years to put together prior to the beginning the arrangement and building and to produce pipe in Shawnee, Oklahoma, is to fulfill a niche around the gas, the mining, industrial, geothermal, technology, and municipal water markets. We strongly believe that the oil and gas sector has shifted permanently, but we also believe that there's alternative purposes in the usage of our products that we will be producing in Oklahoma, which I am sharing with you today. As we believe where the market has shifted, we believe that the product that we are going to be producing in various sizes, capacities, densities, heat resistance, depending on the application required by the end user or the customer, we believe that there's a tremendous opportunity to really provide a special application in terms of today's theme around hydrogen, in terms of what that could look like. But the typical areas that we continue to focus and will be expanding, our facility in Oklahoma will be one of the most cutting edge facilities in the world. We're extremely excited to be able to using modern technology that's going to allow the facility to produce at the highest production levels, using some of the world's best technology, and it's going to allow us to be able to have access to an amazing market from the Port of Houston being railed right into our site, which essentially long-term plan will be railed into the Canadian market, Alberta, BC specifically to begin with, but it also allows us the logistic locations to be able to suffice all kinds of markets, anything including from oil and gas, anything producing water, sour services, CO2s, H2Ss, municipal and industrial, the telecommunication market and sectors in terms of the pipe required, the mining, irrigation, and the geothermals. And the custom mining in terms of the theme today, in terms of lining pipe, steel pipe, what would that look like rather than, you know, digging all the pipes out and replacing them all? We have the technology, we have the resources, we have the expertise amongst our management team with our ownership team that we believe that we're going to be able to provide and can and are providing a solution in terms of lining pipe under the theme of the topic of discussion here today. And so, once again, being mindful of time, we've kept our presentation rather short and brief. We also believe that the advantages in terms of polypropylene pipe, as you'll see on the following slide, again, some of the marketable advantages in our research, what we have found in that time in executing our plan to produce pipe out of Shawnee, Oklahoma, which will also serve our Canadian clients and the needs that we have here in the Canadian market. We believe that we're well situated to be able to fulfill everything from the needs in terms of what are being asked and what the market is looking for. Lightweight, flexible, cost-effective installation, which is something that we're really excited about. We believe that being fiscally responsible, but also being resourcefully responsible and also being responsible to our environment, we really believe that the lifespan that the pipe can produce. Chemical and abrasion resistance is also something that it was really instrumental in our research in developing the business model that we have. Again, UV resistance, superior flow characteristics is something, again, flow. Flow determines the capital requirements in terms of being able to have the right characteristics so that we can do it efficiently, but also doing it profitable for our customers as well. And of course, being mindful of the environments. For those Canadians, we understand the Canadian conditions can be very cold, but also in the extreme, being in the southern part of the US or in the warmer climates around the world. What does that look like in terms of the heat or the cold? We're very mindful in terms of what we can provide in terms of customizing that specifically to our customer and our customer base. And of course, what's really important to us, we're really excited about if we were lining pipe, what does that look like? The continuous slates is very important so that there's no seams, there's no joints. As the slide would indicate, you know, the capacity up to 5,300 feet of availability. And again, we want to make sure that we adhere to some of the best environments in order to be able to apply our products that we are going to be producing in Shawnee, Oklahoma. And one of the key things, folks, that we were really mindful of up and above the development of our businesses is the relationships that we've had between both Canada and the United States. We are extremely well tuned into the energy sector. We're well tuned into the water sector. We understand alternative energy sources are very, very important in today's environment. But with that, we were very, very strategic in aligning ourselves with an amazing Native American group in the citizens of Potawatomi in terms of building our facility. In addition to that, we're extremely excited about the strategic alignment and strategic partnership that has unfolded with the Cruel Management Group and the Penticton First Nation. Because as we see the world, we believe that our two great nations will continue to trade, but we can trade much more seamlessly rather than putting barriers, and that's how we've positioned ourselves. So being mindful of time today, we're excited. ProPipe's facility is well under construction in Shawnee, Oklahoma. We anticipate to begin production late this year or early Q1 of 2021, depending on everything goes well, which we appear to looks like is going to. And we're open for business and open to having dialogue with any of the good folks and companies and organizations that would like to have a discussion around our product offering of what we're producing. So with that, we'd like to again thank you on behalf of the ownership group for including us in this platform today of sharing our vision and our business and our model. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick and Sean, for that presentation. And I'd like to introduce our final presenter for this session on hydrogen blending, Dr. Joshua Brinkerhoff, who is Assistant Professor in the School of Engineering at the University of British Columbia in Okanagan. Dr. Brinkerhoff.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Can everyone hear me and see my screen?
I can hear and see you, Joshua.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do, a little bit different than the other presenters, is just to give a very small slice of look at the fundamental research that's being done at University of British Columbia on particularly hydrogen injection into natural gas pipelines. And this is a very, very brief summary of work that's been done by myself and my colleagues in collaboration with some of the presenters, some of the companies that I've already talked about, and others involved. And the research has been very holistic, and I'm only going to look at a very small slice. But this is a picture highlighting the people, the researchers who are involved, and the different topics that they're looking at. Everything from appliance standards and legacy systems to hydrogen embrittlement in pipeline materials to understanding hydrogen enrichment impacts on gas turbine combustion, hydrogen transport, pure hydrogen transport, removing hydrogen using membranes, and then the main focus of what I'm going to discuss, injection and mixing of the hydrogen into a pipeline. And as far as the fundamental research goes, we have an experimental component, and we also have a computer simulation component. And I'm going to discuss the computer simulations. I'm going to jump over some of the details. The simulation, essentially, it's motivated by trying to understand the dynamics of the mixing when the hydrogen is injected into a methane channel, in this case, methane pipe, and understanding how the mixing occurs and how do we monitor that mixing and ensure that the injection is uniform and that the injection can be controlled over a range of operating conditions and flow rates and so forth. And the focus of the simulation is to really zoom in as to how the two streams mix, the hydrogen and the methane streams, in order to be able to predict that the mixing. And what we know is that the flows are quite complex. There's a lot of turbulent flow interactions that take place. There's vortices that mix, that result in a distribution of the hydrogen fraction. And we wanted to be able to have a good quality look as to how that takes place. And so we've done a very, very expensive, large simulation where we don't make any simplifying assumptions with regards to the nature of the turbulence mixing out these two gases. And the benefit is that we get a very detailed look, and the drawback is the simulation is quite expensive in terms of the computational power and time that's required. But this will allow us to have very good insights as to how the blending and the mixing occurs. Just a little bit of overview as to how it's done. It's essentially using something called computational fluid dynamics, where we simulate the equations of motion governing the gas mixing. It's run on thousands of compute cores on Niagara, which is the largest supercomputer in Canada. And this is one of the large scale simulations that we've done. I'll jump over the technical details of the simulations. Suffice to say that we have two species, natural gas and hydrogen, and they're being mixed in a turbulent flow environment, and we're resolving everything that we can know about the turbulence, and there's no simplifying assumptions. This is just a pretty picture to show how the momentum of the two streams go. So the horizontal part is the natural gas, and the vertical part is the hydrogen. It's mixing in a T-junction, and this color shows the momentum. So you can see how the turbulence is advected and how the hydrogen introduces a region of low momentum, and that low momentum has a major impact on the mixing as it takes place. I'll make mention of that there's two parameters that we're adjusting here. We're adjusting the dimension of the pipe that's bringing the hydrogen in, and we're also mixing the percentage of the flow rates of the two streams. So in this case, it's 8% of hydrogen relative to natural gas. Now, just to give a picture as to how the hydrogen concentration disperses in this turbulent environment, here is red 100% hydrogen, and blue 0% hydrogen. And we can see how that mixing takes place downstream. And what we want to know is, well, what are the best parameters in terms of optimizing this mixing, making sure that it occurs in a uniform way, in a predictable way, and that we can know how far downstream will we get a certain uniformity of the hydrogen concentration. And so we've done some parametric studies where we've looked at varying the hydrogen flow rates and also varying the dimensions of the tube, bringing the hydrogen in and looking at how that affects the mixing. Now, this is a very busy slide. The first column represents the momentum in the flow as you increase the amount of hydrogen from 2% to 8%. And you can see that the more hydrogen you have, you generate this low momentum region near where the hydrogen is introduced. The center column represents the turbulence that's created. More turbulence can mean more mixing, but you also notice on the right column the hydrogen concentration and how uniform that concentration is. And obviously we want to ensure a highly uniform gas mixture downstream. And so it's important for us to understand what are the factors affecting the uniformity and how rapidly those two streams mix. I'll just go on one last slide to show some results. This is the same data but in a different slice. So now we're looking in a cross-stream slice, and we notice that even some tens, 20s of diameters downstream, that the hydrogen concentration is not as uniform as we would expect. We want, and this is important to keep in mind, because if the hydrogen is blended in, we want to know how far downstream of where it's injected, we can be certain of having a certain level of uniformity of the hydrogen mixture so that we know what the gas composition will be. This particular is the same results, now not varying the hydrogen concentration. We keep that fixed, and we just vary the dimensions of the tube bringing the hydrogen in. Again, the center column represents the amount of turbulence, and that affects the amount of there's a dispersion of the two gases. And the right column represents the concentration of the hydrogen, in this case is scalar, and the degrees of uniformity or non-uniformity for the different configurations. So this provides just a really big picture overview of what we've done. What our research is showing is that there can be quite a slow recovery of a quasi-equilibrium concentration in the turbulent flow. It's possible to achieve equilibrium conditions in terms of the hydrogen concentration, but it won't occur very quickly. It may take 50 to 100 pipe diameters downstream of the injection. We're working at further on research trying to understand the effects of different injection parameters and understanding how that works in terms of the mixing downstream, and ultimately trying to come up with a parametric map where we can incorporate the relative gas properties, the injection parameters, the flow rates, and then the dimensions of the injection to understand how rapidly that's going to mix downstream to ensure that it occurs in a uniform, well understood, and controlled way. This brings me to the last part of follow-on work, not just myself, but a number of researchers at UBC and consult with a number of different companies, putting together a pilot facility for building scale hydrogen injection. And we're calling this the H2 Lab, a laboratory for investigating hydrogen-enriched natural gas over a broad sense, from injection, combustion instabilities, mixing, separation, trace gas sensing, and facility integration. This is a facility that's in planning, and we're in the process of submitting funding grants right now, and it's going to establish UBC even more so as a center of excellence for fundamental research in hydrogen injection. And with that, I'll thank you for your attention and pass it over to you, Nicholas. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua, for the overview of the hydrogen injection research at UBC. We'll now move on to the next session, which will discuss current case studies in Canada and the United States. I'd like to present our speaker, Mr. Colin Armstrong, President and CEO of HTEC, a leading developer and provider of hydrogen and supply solutions. Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. Just doing a sound check. You can hear me?
Here you go, Colin.
All right. Well, yeah, no, thanks a lot, Nicholas, and the CHFCA crew for giving us this opportunity. I guess some of my colleagues, and I'll just do an introduction about myself. Say I drank hydrogen Kool-Aid many, many years ago. I made my first hydrogen tank, probably the first hydrogen composite tank in Canada back in 1995. I got involved in HCNG buses, which is relevant to this conversation, in 2005 when we had the first fleet in Canada. I was lucky enough to be involved in the Olympic deployment with Air Liquide and the first 20 buses that were up there. And recently, HTEC opened the first retail station in Canada. So our business at HTEC is fairly vertically integrated in that we're involved in the production, distribution, and fueling stations for hydrogen fuel supply. In our mind, they're pretty integrated and hard to separate. So we're building the capacity and knowledge base to really build and develop and operate projects in these in the supply side of things. So in British Columbia, we have a network of retail stations well underway. So we got 3 open and 3 more in various stages of construction, permitting, and equipment supply. We're working with UBC as well on their station. So this is one element that is creating a demand for hydrogen in the lower mainland of British Columbia. So we are pulling together a production facility with a number of partners. And what I thought I'd do today is just introduce a number of the different elements of this project to give the audience an idea of sort of on the ground what's going on and what needs to happen to actually develop these projects. And so when you're developing a project, you obviously really start with the customer demand or the offtake, and that's a challenge in the hydrogen. Everyone knows the whole chicken and egg argument, but it's worth doing a little bit of a deep dive into it. So really, one strategy is to integrate the demands. So what we're looking at is the industrial gas market, which has the highest value, but it's very limited in British Columbia. There's the transportation market, which we talk about as sort of medium value. It is growing, but it's hard to predict. You can't really take it to the bank per se on the funding side of it. Then there's a natural gas market, as John had alluded to previously. It is quite a bit lower value, but it is large and it can materialize quickly, and we'll talk about some of the challenges on that. So anyway, the goal of the project is to supply these 3 markets, and using a low carbon intensity production, which is electrolysis, about 5 megawatts of electrolysis. And that will make the 2,000 kilograms per day of gaseous hydrogen. You obviously need a site to put it, and willing hosts comes in a number of different places. The community has to be willing, the landowner has to be willing, and you need a space for your equipment and your access for trucks. So a fair number of elements go into that analysis. If we're going to tie into the natural gas grid, you want to be pretty close to a grid that can accept gas. And again, there's a number of different elements that go into that, from validation of customers to the piping to the regulatory side of things. And you really don't want to have to do a lot of piping. Hydrogen piping is still fairly expensive compared to natural gas piping. You need power. In British Columbia, it's called 1823 rates, is really the big industrial rate. That essentially means you get it at the high voltage distribution rates from BC Hydro, which is about 20% lower than your standard industrial rates, but you need your own substation to take it from the high voltage down to the voltage you'll be using it. And then the cost and funding, you have to, for one, figure out what the cost is. You have to round up funding that will tolerate the risk and want to be involved in this type of project. It's about an $18 million project. Our goal is to have this open in early 2022, so about 18 months from now. So that's sort of the backdrop. What I thought I'd do in my couple more minutes is just talk about some of the challenges. So beyond the site and the there is the demand uncertainty that I talked about. Say the mobility is growing and will be more predictable. The natural gas, within that you have seasonal fluctuations, you have the physical barriers, you have the value barrier, you have regulatory constraints. So when I talk about physical, if you look at the table on the right here, it gets a little confused. People talk about percentage most often in volume percent, but when you go down and change that to energy, your numbers go down quite a bit. So we have to just be cognizant of which ones we're talking about, because the value and the GHG reductions is based on the energy, not the volume. When I look at the value, you can take a look. It's about 55 kilowatt hours to make a kilogram of hydrogen. 7 cents a kilowatt hour, that's $3.85 just on the energy cost, or $27 per gigajoule. The current natural gas cost, just the energy portion is about $2, so there's a bit of a differential. And Fortis has been very good in coming up with creative ways of how to deal with this. The RNG side has similar challenges. So they're allowed to buy it up to $30. I don't think they're quite there yet, but it's a real mechanism for helping projects like ours get off the ground. So this all leads to the big challenges of getting your equity and debt and risk-adjusted returns on things. So fundamentally, you need some support still to get this going in areas, which is a lot of areas where you don't have 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. So a real shining light of enabling this is the low carbon fuel and the clean fuel standard. Right now, the BC low carbon fuel is only applicable to the transportation fuel that the facility will sell. And we're hoping that the clean fuel standard will also help in that it will enable the credit generation from the hydrogen that's sold to use in the natural gas grid. And if you take a look at the pricing, you're starting to get that $15 to $20 gigajoule value increase from the clean fuel standard credit generation. So that is a pretty quick snapshot in my 10 minutes here about on the ground developing these projects. We're moving forward with our partners, which is another key ingredient. I don't think anybody can really do this alone. So you have to pull together the various groups. So that's about it. Appreciate the time and definitely around for any questions, or you can contact me at a later point. Thank you very much.
Presentation is very short. It was designed to dovetail with Colin Armstrong's previous presentation. I was having problems with Zoom and my system crashed. So very quickly, this is actually a neat segue from Sam's previous presentation. These couple of slides speak to the concept that Fortis is working on to partner with HTEC in the development of the first Fortis demonstration for the injection of hydrogen into a portion of our low pressure natural gas grid. The advantage of designing this project with the HTEC project is we will avail of the production of hydrogen and align the two projects, such as we will be able to run the Fortis hydrogen injection and blending demonstration project while utilizing some of the supply from the HTEC project. This slide presents at least our in-house tracking of current injection and blending trials around the world. So they vary from less than 5% to 20%. In terms of this project, this first demonstration hydrogen injection and blending project in the part of Fortis, we have not set the standard yet at which we will blend. It would likely start at a low blend concentration. In the region of 2 to 5%, I would expect, so not unlike the project that Sam just mentioned. And it will, based on the technical parameters and the project plans, hopefully increase over time. So the concept would be, it would be initially run as a demonstration project with a view to establishing it as a long-term supply of low carbon hydrogen in a portion of our distribution grid, supplying a cohort of customers. The type of customers will be determined when we have finished the project detailed design, or when we have finished the project front end planning and selected the final location. This is just a snapshot of the FortisBC lower mainland high pressure, red lines, low pressure, green lines, natural gas infrastructure. The location of this project will be somewhere in the more densely populated Metro Vancouver area. And the idea will be to inject and blend into an apportioned piece of our distribution grid that facilitates isolation and a single point feed of a hydrogen natural gas blend. And working with our technical regulators, we will establish the parameters to execute and implement the project. The timeline moving forward is somewhat behind the project that Sam mentioned. Fortis will have to execute some pre-feed and front-end engineering work to inform an application to British Columbia Utilities Commission, likely, and then upon approval of the project, we will proceed with the project itself. What I've just mentioned will be subject to the greenhouse gas reduction regulation change that I spoke to at a high level in my previous presentation. So there are a number of key activities underway. So our business plan priorities I mentioned, and they have to be successfully achieved and fall in place so that we can line a number of different initiative timelines, including this project. One of the key goals of this project will be to establish a local, as I mentioned, a boots on the ground demonstration project to hopefully inform some very pertinent knowledge gaps, especially on the part of Fortis, work with our internal stakeholders and business units to and our external regulators. The idea would be to move from a requirement to survey and test and trial all parts of the gas, the low pressure distribution network prior to hydrogen injection, to hopefully the goal would be the ability to inject and blend into untested networks. So that'll be the key goal of this demonstration project.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
But your slides don't seem to be advancing.
Okay, I'm just moving on to my very last slide.
Okay. We just see your title slide, but I guess continue up.
Oh, so I've just moved through my slides. I'm on my third slide. Apologies for that. Can you see this slide?
We just see the title slide here, John.
Okay. Again, apologies. I've been having problems with Zoom all day, but this finishes my final presentation, speaking at a high level to the initial plans for Fortis Lower Mainland based boots on the ground hydrogen injection and blending demonstration project. So thank you.
Thank you for calling. I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Mr. Sam McDermott, Technical Manager for Renewable Hydrogen in the Business Development Team at Enbridge. Sam?
Thank you. I'm just going to be switching my screen here and do a share. Okay, can you see my screen?
You can see your screen, Sam.
Okay, so my name, as mentioned, is Samuel McDermott. I work for Enbridge Gas. I'm the technical manager for renewable hydrogen in the business development group. And just a little bit about Enbridge. If you don't know, we're enterprise-wide about 13,000 employees, and the gas distribution side of the business where I work in Toronto, we have about 3.75 million customers. Today, what I want to talk to you is about, just briefly, the vision. What is Enbridge's vision with regard to a hydrogen, and how we see this playing out for us, and where we see the future within our domain. So for us, we see it as a natural fit. It is our purpose is to move energy around to our customers, just essentially delivering what our customers want and need. It's also something to enable us to have continued leadership within the low carbon space. We've been at this for quite a while with our wind assets and our early adoption of solar. We're now have moved heavily into the offshores. And so we see this as another effort at diversification of the energy portfolio that we have. We also see this as a way to enable large-scale storage. And I read somewhere just recently that bringing in the electrolyzers are a game changer in enabling large-scale storage from non-dispatchable sources such as wind and solar. The big one here for us, again, is connecting to the natural gas grid. We see this as an enabler of an intertie between both grids. And in doing so, you also get the benefits of carbon reduction in the natural gas distribution system. So a little bit more on the energy intertie. The gas distribution network, we have many thousands of miles of gas infrastructure, and we see this as a way to potentially provide large-scale energy storage in the future. Hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, it gives us the versatility that we need, and we're looking at this from all sectors, including transportation, the energy sector, an obvious one, and industry. We've spoken about industrial feedstocks and others, and we are looking at all avenues. The picture on the left there just shows you, it's something that I put together with our partners in our corporate head office a few years ago, and it's just quickly demonstrate how our process works. We take the power, we run it through an electrolyzer, we are producing the hydrogen, and the plan is to put a small portion of this in the natural gas grid to start blending within North America. So more on that to come. So a little bit about the plant itself. So the plant, it is a joint venture between us and Hydrogenics, and it's 2.5 megawatts of energy, and it's scalable to 5 on the same footprint. Now the footprint is quite small. It's only 10 feet, 10.5 meters by 14 meters roughly, so about 126 or around there square meters. Not very big, but the plant can put out about 1,000 kilograms of hydrogen a day max, and about 500 cubes per hour, or 12,000 on a 24-hour day cycle. The plant is under a contract to the ISO. So the ISO is the Independent Electricity System Operator that looks after the electrical grid within the province. And they use an AGC signal to control the plant. What happens, one of the drawbacks to that as a result is the production of the plant, the output is dictated by that signal. So if the signal is down, it's primarily there to control the ancillary service we're providing, which is to enable them to keep the frequency of the grid at the 60 hertz mark. So if it's too high, they can ramp up the plant and bring it back down to 60. And if it's too low, they can back off the plant to get it back there. So it's very dynamic, as others have mentioned before. And I think Mike Archambault will show you that graph that I really like to show people, but that shows you the plant can respond within milliseconds. The purity of the hydrogen is quite high. It's 99.99%. And, we have the capability of producing the hydrogen at an even higher grade that is acceptable for the Society of Automotive Engineering for fuel cell electric vehicles. So our approach was twofold. The first part was to demonstrate that we could take the electrical energy, convert it to gas, provide the ancillary services, and then turn it back to demonstrate just mildly that we can turn it back into electricity, well, via a fuel cell. We've done that. The plant has been running since May 2018, and it's been performing quite well. The second part where we're at now is to demonstrate the first and to demonstrate that we can inject a portion of the hydrogen into the natural gas grid safely and effectively. And we currently have an application in front of the Ontario Energy Board to blend a small amount of renewable hydrogen in a small portion of our natural gas grid. It's about 3,600 customers. We're looking to start our blending with about 2%, up to 2% hydrogen. And we're expecting to hear from the decision from the board in November of this year. And we would start construction around Q1 next year, end of Q1 next year. And we're hopeful that we can start blending by the end of August 2021. Other things we're looking at, enabler of dispatchable power. This is one of the opportunities that is there for this technology. So, non-dispatchable assets like wind and solar, no longer do you have to curtail them. You can run them at any point in time and store the hydrogen for future use. We've talked about the FCEVs, and there's also the industrial feedstock as we see more and more industries are moving towards green hydrogen. And the last bullet there talks about GHG free heating. So to summarize, renewable hydrogen, we see this as just a really natural fit for Enbridge. One, because of its versatility, the flexibility that it offers, just like electricity, it is an awesome energy carrier, and you can do a lot with it. The intertie between the gas and electrical grid is important for all ratepayers and for all, Ontarians and people across Canada and the US. And the reason for that is because you do not have to invest heavily in any additional infrastructure. On the coldest day, the gas grid can generate, it maxes out at about, in Ontario, about 80 terawatt hours, just about 83 terawatt hour of energy. The electrical grid on the hottest day can produce about 23 terawatt hours. So we see this as a natural evolution for us. And we see this as a way for governments to save funds on the amount of infrastructure that they have to build. It's already there, we can utilize it. And we believe this is a critical part of enabling the governments to meet the 2 degrees pre-industrial level target that has been set. So with that in mind, I believe I'm there. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Nicholas and Mark for having us, the CHFCA. If you have questions, fire them along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Jürgen Peter, CEO of Renewable Hydrogen Canada. Jürgen.
Yes, hello. Nicholas, if you can put that one slide up, then I can talk to this overview picture I have. Are you able to do that?
So let me open it up here, Jürgen, one sec.
What I'd like to discuss is a project that we're working together with Fortis and Macquarie of Australia to put together a large-scale hydrogen facility. We've been hearing lots about the technical aspects, how to make hydrogen, how to use it. One of the big problems has always been cost of hydrogen. And this is a chicken and egg situation. And in order to accomplish the goals that were set out earlier also by John Quinn, namely those that the BC government has set on the one hand with the renewable gas standard being 15% renewable by 2030. And more importantly, also in parallel, the desire of many of the end customers, such as the City of Vancouver, who want to essentially eliminate the component of CO2 from the natural gas as soon as possible to reduce the carbon footprint in their quest to become the greenest city in the world, has brought up an opportunity to take advantage of some of the unique situation we have in northern BC. We all know by now that the cost of hydrogen is essentially all a function of the cost of electricity. And in this case, I'm strictly talking about green hydrogen. So we are privileged to have access to a large number of very high energy wind sites in northern British Columbia from a company called Aeolus Wind, which I also control. We've recently commissioned a new wind project that has a net capacity factor at the grid intertie of around 50%. That's unheard of for normal wind projects, and allows, of course, the cost of renewable energy to come down, which is the key, because 75% of the cost of hydrogen is cost of electricity. Another important thing is, which has been discussed before as well, is carbon intensity. The BC hydro grid has an average carbon intensity of around 19 grams CO2 per megajoule. Wind power is below 1.5, so it has a very big advantage. So it's both lower cost and also lower carbon intensity. The downside, of course, with all renewables, much like wind and solar, is that they're intermittent. So an important thing here in British Columbia is that we have a large storage system from Hydro Network, from BC Hydro. And if you combine the two, you can achieve economics that allow hydrogen to be produced at costs unlike anything that's currently has been done. Now, before I get into how we get this thing to market, is one other component that's very important is what do you do with the waste energy? When you take electricity and put in an electrolyzer, roughly 25% or so of the energy put in manifests itself as waste heat, hot water. It's not high enough grade heat to really recover much energy, so typically it's just rejected to the atmosphere. At the scale of project we're talking about here, which is also 150 megawatt, you would generate very, very large amount of waste energy. So we made arrangements with the local First Nations, a number of them, in the Treaty 8 territory in the northeast of British Columbia, to build gigantic greenhouses that otherwise you couldn't build because, as we all know, the northeast of BC, it gets very cold in the winter and you couldn't possibly afford to heat greenhouses and be economical. But land is cheap, and if the energy source is free, you can build some very attractive projects. The first project we expect to have 250 full-time First Nation jobs under the Sundance Produce moniker, which would recover the waste heat from the electrolyzers and ship it over as hot water to heat the greenhouses. And this would be particularly attractive nowadays, in that food security has become a new a key issue that many years ago was not quite, or even maybe months ago before COVID came, has not been as much of an issue. So we are recovering otherwise wasted energy in a successful way in making renewable organic produce under Sundance. So then once you have made the hydrogen, the next point is how do you get it to market? So the northeast of BC is host to a very large number of gas wells. Some of this was now being developed for the export with the large Shell project for LNG. But a very large amount is transported south via the Enbridge pipeline, and we've heard from Enbridge before, where about 1.5 billion cubic foot of gas goes south from the northeast to Vancouver and then onward for that part that's not consumed in Vancouver, or in British Columbia, I should say, over to Washington and Oregon. The idea is now to inject hydrogen at this large volume into this pipeline, but because of the large flow, you end up, despite having 150 to 170 megawatt electrolyzer, you end up with below 3% concentration of hydrogen by volume. So it's a very easy target compared to trying to put that amount directly into the distribution grid. Now there's some technical challenges. We're working together with Fortis, of course, and Enbridge, and Macquarie, who are our financial partner. They're the global largest investment bank that works in renewable energy. They're also the principal founders for the funders, rather, not founders, for the I think it's 1,000 megawatt hydrogen power to gas project in Australia. So they have looked around the world and they see this as a very unique opportunity here. So there are now, there's work ongoing between Fortis, Enbridge, Macquarie, and we're also in the process of engaging with several of the US utilities that would receive the gas coming over the border to enable the introduction of low concentrations of gas into the transmission system. That's actually a different challenge than the one that John Quinn was referring to on the distribution system. The demonstrations that are being done by Enbridge in Ontario and that's planned for BC, they have all been done many times already in Europe. There are sort of higher concentrations at the distribution system running for many years already, but I guess it has to be all redone here to make sure that there are no issues that are different here in Canada than they would be over there. While these tests go on, additional studies are now underway to test to find out what implications, if any, would there be on the transmission system. So that's the Achilles heel, so to speak, the timeline that's required to enable the introduction. But once that is enabled, we see a very, very large project with very attractive economics due to the fact that there's, again, a very low cost, very clean source of energy, much below the average cost of BC Hydro. And that's sort of the overview of what I wanted to show. It's important to think that there's another benefit that hasn't been mentioned to my knowledge in this presentation today, that once you have a certain percentage of gas in the gas system, say around 8%, then every gas supply point becomes a hydrogen supply point because you can extract it again. So that is something that for the future would also help enable the access to the transportation sector, because right now putting hydrogen into the gas grid is primarily for the build sector, which is under strong pressure to decarbonize, but it doesn't really help much for the transportation sector. But once you reach sometime in the future 8, 10 or more % of hydrogen, then you can take it again at every supply point. And one key message that we've learned by doing a lot of work on all this for many years now is that scale does matter. Small scale electrolysis is very expensive, and even when you go large scale, the key parameter above all else is the cost of electricity. So we think by having low carbon, low cost electricity, a very good location physically with the injection capability into the large T-cells grid from Enbridge, and customers like Fortis and others down south, we think this is a pretty unique opportunity to bring mainstream hydrogen into the system at a very attractive cost. And I think we're probably behind schedule and everything, so I'll leave it at that, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to produce this project. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Jürgen. Now we'll shift over to case studies in the US, and we'll hear from Mr. Kevin Harrison, Senior Manager at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado. Kevin?
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and my slide should be popping up there shortly. And everyone can see my title slide, Nicholas?
Yep, we can see here, Kevin.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who's held on so far in this presentation. This is a power to renewable natural gas discussion, and my partner, Ron Kent from SoCal Gas, will be presenting after this to provide a larger picture from his organization. But I wanted to just briefly talk about NREL and our key program areas in this space. We do work on small scale cells. So we do cell level MEA type work at research and development on fuel cells and electrolyzers. We also do megawatt scale stack testing at our energy systems integration facility at NREL in Golden, Colorado. So we believe in all aspects of this research opportunity, not only producing it, but moving it. We do compressor research, storage, and of course I mentioned fuel cells. And our colleague from Siemens mentioned synthesis, and that's really what the rest of this presentation discusses, is the ability for hydrogen to act as, actually to be glued onto carbon dioxide in this case, and be stored in the natural gas grid as a direct 100% material compatible direct replacement fuel for fossil natural gas. And I also agree with the sector coupling, or the power to X, power to gas, whatever we want to call it. But in this case, we bring together a number of the sectors, really, the electricity network. So this is basically taking from the hydrogen at scale slide that Sunita showed a few hours back, and coupling that with waste streams. So as long as there's people on the planet, we'll have wastewater treatment plants, landfills, dairies, anything that is releasing, in this case, biogas, which is a mixture of methane and CO2, can be upgraded in this bioreactor, this biomethanation process, which uses naturally occurring organisms to convert CO2, hydrogen into methane and water. So once that leaves the green box in the center, it can be injected into the natural gas grid and do whatever natural gas does today. It creates power as it heats homes, of course, and as a chemical feedstock. So this is a way to carry the hydrogen into the natural gas grid today on the back of CO2. And no energy storage presentation's complete without showing where this technology fits. So this power to gas, hydrogen, or power to methane, whether you're storing it as hydrogen in the natural gas network, it's capable of large scale, utility scale energy storage that lasts months or weeks. So our partner SoCal Gas, there's a comment down there from Ron, basically giving you a feel for the large scale energy storage opportunity in SoCal Gas alone. Having 4 underground storage facilities in their territory. And this speaks to what Joshua mentioned earlier, not only the energy density of comparing methane and hydrogen, so adding the carbon into this mix, preferably from biogenic sources at first, whether it be one of the 15,000 wastewater treatment plants in the US. So you do get this volumetric energy density improvement by starting to recycle CO2 or starting to recycle some of our waste streams today. And why is California interested in it? Well, low-cost electricity has been named multiple times as the key enabler to making low-cost hydrogen. So taking this data from California and how much wind and solar they're already curtailing or shutting off. So by each year, you can see how much electricity has been turned off. This data was borrowed from the California ISO, and how much energy. And then if you made, assuming 50 kilowatt hours per kilogram of hydrogen, other people presented 50 to 55, whatever you want to use, that's fine. But there's a number of metric tons of hydrogen you would make. And then what if you combine that hydrogen in a biomethanation technology, a bioreactor? That's how many metric tons of CO2 that you could have recycled to date. So this graph needs to be updated, but presumably California and other states, other regions, other countries, as you pursue higher penetrations of electricity, there will be a growing number of hours in the year, of course, where you can get not only low cost, but zero. There are parts of the year in Maine where the entire state is negative in terms of electricity prices because of wind, which is one of our partners as well. So there exist carbon markets. California's low carbon fuel standard usually gets brought up pretty frequently, but there's also US federal programs like 45Q, where you can get tax incentives for recycling or utilizing CO2. There's the renewable fuel standard on a federal level. So there's this growing number of carbon markets, and I'm showing here that depending on where the carbon comes from, what color, so to speak, the electrons are, you can be carbon negative. So you can see where zero lies a little above halfway. So anything below that, of course, you'll start to be carbon negative. And RNG from dairies is always used as a good example where you can be significantly carbon negative. And this was borrowed from the World Resources Institute to show the carbon intensity of RNG and other fuels. At NREL, we've been working in this space of renewable electrolysis for over 15 years. And the picture on the right is from one of our partners. We've historically worked with Proton Onsite, now Hydrogen and Giner ELX. So we do large scale 1 to 2 megawatt electrolyzer stack testing. And the picture helps tell the story. You can see the DC wires coming into this electrolyzer stack. And oh, by the way, there's a mere number of those wires on the backside of the stack that you can't see in the picture. And if nothing speaks electrons to molecules more than this picture really, is the electricity going in. This is nominally about a 250 kilowatt stack, and you have this 1/2 inch diameter stainless steel tube that's moving hydrogen out at 400 psi. So this is our electrolyzer stack test bed that we are reconfiguring right now to operate not a 250 kilowatt stack, but closer to 750 kilowatt electrolyzer stack from one of our partners. That was step 1. Step 2 in this biomethanation process combines CO2, in this case from a dewar. So we are not near a CO2 pipeline or a CO2 source, so we actually have our CO2 trucked in for this research project. Of course, if we were closer, perhaps we would talk to cores and try to get a CO2 pipeline from, you know, their brewing facilities down in Golden, Colorado. But for today, we are demonstrating this at sort of the 100 to 200 kilowatt range. Our partner, Electrocea, has demonstrated this in 2 different facilities in Europe, one in Denmark, one in Switzerland. So this technology is scalable. So what we're pursuing in the US is closer to 5 to 10 megawatt electrolyzer systems feeding a bioreactor. And I list some of the benefits of this biomethanation taking step 2 of this process, because most of the energy that you spend in this process goes into the electrolyzer. So if you were at 10 megawatt electrolyzer system, 95% of the energy goes into the electrolysis step, another 5% to upgrade that hydrogen, let these organisms do the one thing they've been doing for millions of years, and that's do the conversion from CO2 to CH4, and you get pipeline quality CH4 out of this bioreactor system. The research component here for NREL is looking at hydrogen mass transfer and systems integration. So how can we more closely couple the electrolyzer and this bioreactor to improve hydrogen mass transfer, getting gases dissolved into solution, basically a seawater-like solution that where the organisms can act on them, metabolize the feedstock gases, and we're looking to team up with people like SoCal Gas and Summit Utilities. Xcel Energy comes to mind, Portland General Electric. They're all interested in this idea of moving electrons, preferably renewable, low carbon, low cost electrons into molecules. So this CH4 is one example of that approach. Inside the building, we have this electrolyzer system that I mentioned that we're upgrading to 750 kilowatt, balance of plant. It operates at elevated pressure. That is one of the benefits of PEM, where you can have hydrogen at 30 or 40 or 50 bar, or even higher. Some companies have been working on even higher hydrogen pressure, while the oxygen water side can be lower. And then outside we have a growing infrastructure of hydrogen refueling at both of the common pressures. We do compressor research. In the middle, that 25-foot tall is the bioreactor, and we have a storage up to about 350 kilograms at 3 different pressures on the right of that picture. And just to give you a feel for, multiple people have talked about modulating power on an electrolyzer stack, and that's very doable. It's an electrochemical device, so it responds very quickly. And this bioreactor is also something you can make step changes in gases. So you can closely couple the bioreactor to the electrolyzer, and as you're slewing power to the electrolyzer, that is changing the flow rate of hydrogen, and the organisms in this bioreactor can load follow as well. So that's the main takeaway really of this slide, showing some of the changes in pressure, which are intentional, moving up to 18 bar. This bioreactor system is capable of operating at 18 bar, and the conversion reached over 98%. So you can see CO2, which are the gray dots, fall. You can see changes in agitation, that last step. So we are obviously conducting some research during this first 40 hours of operation back in August, I believe, showing 98% conversion of CO2 to methane. And some of the economics, it probably needs to be said one more time that starting with low-cost electricity is really the enabler to having low-cost electricity, and then decreasing the electrolyzer capital costs. All the companies, whether it's Siemens or Geen or ELX or now Hydrogen, Hydrogenics, McPhee, ITM, all the electrolyzer manufacturers, my apologies if I missed any, but they're all working and have this pathway to cut electrolyzer capital costs. And this shows basically a waterfall chart on how to achieve down to about $10 in MMBTU. And I have to make this point each time is because there is a market for renewable natural gas that is different from fossil natural gas. So being at $10 or $15 in MMBTU not only requires low-cost electricity, and on the y-axis here, a carbon market incentive. But if you are in Maine, for example, again, they pay $9 in MMBTU. So the idea is not to compete with fossil. It's going to be difficult, if impossible, to be at $3 in MMBTU or whatnot. But there are carbon markets, and there are RNG markets that support technologies like this. And the LCFS is one of the enablers, of course, as well, where if your production costs can be in a $10 to $15 range, you are eligible for credits depending on whether you're at a dairy or a landfill, and you can see the different credit values that the LCFS provides. Our partners, once again, we've been working not only with Sunita and the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technology Office, but Bioenergy, Solar, and Ron Kent, who will speak shortly at SoCal Gas, has been an amazing partner. Our technology provider, Electricea, out of Germany, has teamed up with Storengy and Engie, and there's this real promise to continue this pathway for this technology. So there's our partners and my contact information. So feel free to follow up with questions directly or otherwise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.
Pleasure to be here, and thanks for everyone that's hung around and listened to the whole day. It's been really quite interesting. So Southern California Gas, for those that aren't aware, that we serve essentially half the state of California, about half the population. We send out about 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas every year. And our storage field, as Kevin mentioned, holds about 13 terawatt hours of energy. That's if you inject the gas into the systems and then pull it out and combust it, or somehow turn it into electricity at about a 30% efficiency rate. So 13 terawatt hours is a pretty competitive battery. Our vision is to be the cleanest natural gas utility in North America. So I think we're in competition with some of our Canadian friends up there. We'll see who gets there. I hope we all succeed. Our challenge is about 40 million tons of CO2. That's the CO2 equivalent every year associated with the gas that we distribute and our customers use. So all we need to do is get rid of 40 million tons of CO2 a year. And so there's a lot of push in California. There's, we're trying to get to 80% below the 1990 levels by 2050. And our goal is to get 5% renewable gas by 2022 and 20% renewable gas by 2030. We're looking at, a variety of what we think are scalable, affordable solutions. Electrolytic hydrogen with methanation, as Kevin has talked about. A different approach to that, which is called electromethanogenesis, where you don't need an electrolyzer, you just go electrons to methane using microbes. Electrochemical CO2 reduction, which is, again, taking electricity and making methane with CO2 not requiring the production of hydrogen. And distributed electric steam methane reforming with carbon capture and sequestration. There's a number, that's what I'm going to talk about today. There's a number of other things that we're doing: methane pyrolysis, electrocatalytic compression, biomass gasification with carbon capture, solar water splitting, and hydrogen blending. So by the way, there was this presentation earlier about hydrogen blending. One thing that we've discovered is putting baffles in the pipe is a tremendous help to getting good mixture. Thought I would just throw that in here. So power to gas is, Kevin discussed, and I mentioned that we have two approaches. What Kevin discussed was option one there, where we have water electrolysis plus biomethanation. And then the other approach is just what we call electromethanogenesis, where we have electrodes and microbes and CO2, and they make methane. This is something that happens in nature at deep sea vents where there's CO2, some free electrons, and some minerals that act as catalysts and so forth. So there's microbes that do this. The example there on the far right is a very super high surface area electrode that is really conducive to driving this reaction. This is a project we're doing with Lawrence Livermore Lab in California and Stanford University. Here's some more information on it. When they distribute the slides, you can look at this in more detail, but you can see that the electrode is a pretty simple system. It's essentially 3D printed, and we form a carbon aerogel structure. Again, that gets us great surface area. So we put in electrons and CO2, and we get, thanks to these microbes, we get methane out. And then we're working with Opus 12, a Silicon Valley or cyclotron road startup in Berkeley, to do electrochemical CO2 reduction. So you basically add CO2 and water, and using their electrocatalytic process, you get methane. So why are we doing all this with methane? Why not just have hydrogen? Well, hydrogen is great, but it does reduce our energy value quite a bit. It only has essentially 330 BTUs per standard cubic foot, and methane, of course, is 990 or something in that neighborhood. So it does, methane does do a really good job of moving hydrogen around. So, it's one reason maybe that we should continue to do that in some form or fashion. And then another approach completely is to take natural gas and use electricity, renewable electricity, to reform it on a distributed level. So we can have hydrogen production, at filling stations and that sort of thing, using electricity and in these super efficient microchannel reactors. Since the process itself is endothermic, it means that you get about a 20% renewable attribute in the, even though you're starting with, say, fossil methane, you get about a 20% renewable attribute in the hydrogen that comes out of it. So that's one thing that makes it interesting. We are actually in the process of building a first commercial pilot of this a station that would have these reactors. You can see in the pictures, you know, what the microchannel reactor looks like inside. That disc at the lower part of the photograph there is the reactor itself, and then up above you see he's holding some heat exchangers. System itself is very, very efficient, over 70% efficient. And then here's something completely different. This is what we call a catalytic non-thermal plasma reactor. So we create a simple corona discharge plasma and use that to drive the reaction. And so that's something that we can in a very compact form factor make hydrogen from electricity and methane and water. Something we're developed with Jet Propulsion Laboratory here in Pasadena, and we're now building some commercial prototypes. This is something that Kevin mentioned. You know, there's plenty of CO2 out there. In the US, we have 200 operating refineries that produce about almost 16 billion gallons of ethanol. A typical ethanol plant produces about 50 million gallons of ethanol and emits about 150 metric tons of CO2. So each 50 megawatts of electricity can recycle about 37,000 tons of CO2. Therefore, it would take about 200 megawatts of electrolysis for a typical ethanol plant to capture all of its CO2 and turn it into methane. So there are some examples of some technologies that we're working on. We don't think that technology is really the problem. What we need is an ecosystem that would support it. So we need laws, regulations, and tariffs to actually allow this to happen. We need to model the dispatch of large, long-duration storage systems, perhaps create what we call a virtual storage island that can be dispatched. So you put electricity in there when you have excess, and you can pull it out you know, when you need it. This virtual island would, in physical reality, would be distributed throughout, you know, the region, but treated as one island. And then finally, we need access to wholesale electric rates. We can't be paying commercial retail rates for the electricity to make hydrogen. So we need to get access to the wholesale market. None of that really exists at this point, and it's a huge barrier. And that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Ron. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Nicholas. Nicholas is the Executive Director of the British Columbia Utilities Commission, or BCUC for short. Nicola?
Hello. Yes, I'll just share my screen. Are you able to see that?
Yes, we can see it here, Nicola.
Okay, great. I will try to go through this fairly quickly. I'm conscious of the time. So my name is Nicholas Simon. I'm the Executive Director of Facilities and Planning at the BC Utilities Commission. And before BCUC, I was also at FortisBC, and before that at Ballard Power Systems for many years. Who is the BC Utilities Commission? We are an independent regulatory agency of the government of BC. And as a quasi-judicial entity, we do make legally binding decisions, and we take our responsibilities to the public and to the companies we regulate very seriously. BCUC regulates energy utilities to ensure customers have access to safe, reliable energy service at a reasonable price, while allowing the utility to have an opportunity to earn a fair return. We strive to balance the competing interests of the sectors we regulate to ensure British Columbians are best served. What we do, we are probably most known for regulating energy utilities, which includes setting rates, approving facility construction, energy purchases, securities and exemptions. But in addition, we also regulate ICBCs, basic insurance, tolls on interprovincial pipelines. We oversee the reliability of the electric transmission grid, gas marketer activities, and very recently, we administer the Fuel Price Transparency Act. In addition, we also review matters, excuse me, on our own initiative or referred by the government. Some recent examples are we've conducted 2 phases of an electric vehicle charging inquiry, and also we have also just had an Indigenous utility regulation inquiry and the gasoline price inquiry. Apologies. Energy regulation. In British Columbia, a public utility, and I put up the full definition just because it encapsulates quite a few activities. So basically, any person who owns or operates equipment from production to delivery of electricity, natural gas, or any agent for the production of light, heat, and cold is considered a public utility, which means that most entities providing utility service are regulated by the BCUC. There are certain exclusions in our Act. This includes municipalities, certain geothermal activities, and things like wellhead production of oil and gas. Generally, energy utilities are regulated because there is no, excuse me, or limited competition to provide these energy services. Regulation is often needed when customers do not have a choice of the energy provider, such as natural gas or electricity, or there is a need to protect the customer. Historically, entities have been owned and operated as an end-to-end production to distribution service, but recently we are seeing technological developments that mean that generation in particular can be built in smaller increments and owned by companies independent of traditional utilities. In terms of hydrogen, what this means is under current legislation, producers, transmitters, and distribution of hydrogen for the provision of heat or light, or would be considered a public utility and subject to British Columbia Utility Commission oversight, such as setting rates, approving facility construction plans, energy purchases. However, the BCUC has established principles regarding regulation, which are to only regulate where required, such as where legislation requires, or there are natural monopoly characteristics and public interest considerations, and that regulation should not impede competitive markets. Where regulation is required, to use the least amount of regulation needed to protect the ratepayer, and that the benefits of regulation should outweigh the costs. So while hydrogen is still in the early stages, I thought it would be valuable to bring some examples of other areas where the BCUC has conducted inquiries, and those have resulted in exemptions from active regulation. The first one is electric vehicle charging services. I'd mentioned before the BCUC had conducted an electric vehicle charging inquiry, and the result of that was an exemption for the sale, delivery, or provision of electricity for EV charging stations for entities that are not already a public utility. And so that meant that we are not regulating rates. There are certain aspects of safety that we do still regulate. In addition, for renewable natural gas or biogas, there was also an inquiry looking at renewable natural gas suppliers to utilities, and it was found, as was the case for electric vehicle charging, that the service doesn't exhibit monopoly characteristics, and there is an exemption for RNG suppliers to utilities, and that was considered to reduce the regulatory burden on those suppliers, and also the Commission does still review the supply contracts to the utilities. The next part I mentioned, but I think this may already have been covered, is that there is a provincial regulation, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Regulation, that allows public utilities to undertake certain activities and include those costs in customer rates. These are all related to greenhouse gas reductions. The one that, again, has been mentioned is that public utilities can pay up to $30 per gigajoule in today's dollars, up to a maximum of 5% of their core customer consumption. However, it should be expected that utilities will be looking to secure competitive prices, as they have an obligation to serve customers and provide just and reasonable rates. Finally, to also draw attention to something that I have heard mentioned before is the Clean BC plan, which, as well as including a minimum requirement of 15% to come from renewable gas, also includes a discussion of the development of a hydrogen economy, including accelerating the development of the economy, financial support for fuel cell electric vehicles and infrastructure, and hydrogen in the natural gas grid. And I've provided the link there. That is not something that we are undertaking, but that is something that I wanted people to be aware of. Finally, if anybody has any questions after this presentation, you can either contact our Commission Secretary or contact me directly. That's my presentation.
Thank you for that, Nicola. With that, we've concluded all of the speaker presentations for today's webinar. Unfortunately, we're running a bit over time here, so I do encourage all of our attendees to submit their questions to us in the text box or through email. Please contact the CHFCA. On behalf of the CHFCA and our co-hosts, the Cool Group and the Trade Commissioner Service, I'd like to thank our panelists and all of our attendees for attending today's webinar, and we wish you a pleasant week. Take care, everyone.
And this is Mark Kirby. I'd also like to add my thanks to everybody for attending, and especially my thanks to the speakers, all of who presented very interesting papers and that highlighted the scale of the opportunity, how advanced the technology is, and the interest that there is amongst First Nations and others to start moving forward on projects like this. I think we can agree that there is an enormous opportunity here for projects and for work to be done, but it was also highlighted many times the challenges around codes, standards, need for demonstrations, and all to get the economics where it makes sense. But what I was very encouraged is that companies like Renewable Hydrogen Canada and HTEC are finding ways to get projects move forward. And are actually getting projects on the ground that will make money. So I'm delighted to see that people are finding ways to get that financing in place and to move it forward. I encourage others to look and to start working on projects and to consult with the speakers to see what they can learn from them. Thanks again.